Welcome to the journey of the bedtime storytelling monk, where you don't have to try to do anything. There are no goals, no tasks, no one judging you, just a really quiet space opening up. Tonight's stories are like old friends finding their way back to you, carrying with them the warmth of a campfire, the smell of the earth after the rain, the gentle teachings of Buddhism and Zen Buddhism that have been passed down through generations under the dense trees or in the pure silence of the dawn. Now they've found their way to where you're sitting. And before the conversation began, I asked quietly, where are you listening? How are you in the room? And what time is it where you are now? You can share it or not. It's entirely up to you. The question is just to remind that even though we are entering into silence, we are not alone. Let these narratives gently enter you like the moonlight on calm water. Take a deep breath slowly, and as you exhale, let the story begin to flow toward you. Once upon a time, on the edge of a small village, there was a humble, unremarkable house. The roof sagging slightly after many seasons of rain and sunshine, the old floorboards creaking every time anyone stepped up, but the door of the house was always open. People in the area often call it the house that always lights up, because anyone who passes by, whether an acquaintance or a stranger, can enter without knocking on the door. One autumn afternoon, a tired traveler stood on the veranda. His shoulders were heavy, and his breathing was short, as if squeezed by the worries he had carried in his bag. When the landlord opened the door and saw him, she just smiled kindly and said, "Come in. There is no judgment here. Only hot tea and a place to rest." The traveler sat down by the fire, and soon the tension in his eyes began to dissipate. That night, he slept peacefully. The next morning, the visitor left, but soon there was a knock at the door. This time, it was an angry man, his fists clenched so tightly that the skin on his joints was white. His jaw clenched as if he was trying to contain the storm within. The landlord still opened the door, inviting him in, without a word of judgment. She led him to a chair by the fireplace, leaving him to scream, cry, then silence, then anger. And when the sound subsided, she handed him a piece of warm bread as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And then they came, one emotion at a time, as unexpected guests of life. The joy came on a spring afternoon, running barefoot through the garden, laughing so much that even the flowers trembled. Sadly, a few days later, he walked heavily. His robe was soaked from the sudden rain. The lonely appeared in the middle of the night, trembling, his eyes blank as if he had seen nothing. Hope comes like a light, brilliant but fragile breeze. Fear sometimes knocks on the door twice on the same day, as if it loses its way and comes back to check on something. But the landlord is always open, never refusing anyone. Once, a village boy, out of curiosity, asked, "Why did you let them all in, even the most terrifying guests?" The host looked at him with gentle eyes and replied, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They come and go. None of them are me." That statement was like a door to another understanding. It comes from an ancient Sufi poem by Rumi, but is beloved in the Buddhist tradition because of what meditation often teaches. You are not your feelings. You are the one who witnesses them, the one who makes space for them, the one who lets them pass. Anger is not wrong. It's just guests. Sometimes intense, sometimes dangerous, but it carries a message, and if you drive it away, it will find another way to come back. Sadness is not weakness either. He's a guest who sometimes sits around all week, but if you give him a seat instead of pretending not to see him, he'll gently leave at the right time. Even the joy, no matter how much you want to keep it forever, has to leave. But that's okay, because you can open the door for it again. Suffering often comes when we believe that those visitors are permanent, when we let them define themselves. I'm worried, I'm weak, I'm bad. But that's just a guest, and you are home, stable, open, and unfettered by any guests. One monk struggled with anxiety for years, trying to dispel it by meditating deeply, being silent for hours, or ignoring it. But it didn't work until his teacher said, "Don't fight with the guest. Invite it in, pour tea for it, ask him what he came here for." And when anxiety resurfaced, the monk just said quietly, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't love it, but he didn't hate it either. He just watched, and when he was seen in a gentle way, that worry gradually softened and then left. Living like a guest house is not about giving up or letting your emotions ruin the house. It is not to be confused between the guest and the host, between the experience and the true nature. You set the boundaries, but don't build the walls. You practice loving kindness, not control. You are present, not possessive. Sometimes the emotions come unexpectedly. Sometimes they bang on the door. Sometimes they cry in the night. But every time that happens, you just breathe, listen, and then gently remind yourself that you're still home, peaceful, intact. When you welcome emotions, you regain ownership. You are no longer a prisoner of them. And when you learn to welcome your guests, you also stop judging other people's guests. You realize the anger in someone's eyes is not them, it's just their guest. You become safer, gentler, more practical, because you are used to sitting with your own guests. On a windy night, when a sudden emotion strikes, a pain in the chest, a passing sadness, a flash of joy, you can stop, inhale, and ask, "What are you here to teach me?" Then let it pass. In another place, in another age, a Zen story is passed down about a confident young monk. He studied for many years, memorized the scriptures, debated the Dharma, wrote treatises on emptiness and selflessness. He believed that he understood many things, and in that confidence, he went to the Zen master Obaku with the desire to prove his understanding. He bowed his head and asked, "What is the ultimate truth of Buddhism?" A well-prepared question. But Obaku didn't reply with any words. Instead, he took a step forward and shouted. A sudden, thunderous scream was so strong that the young monk's mind seemed to be torn apart. He was startled, his heart pounded, and all thoughts disappeared in an instant. There is no more reasoning, no more knowledge, only open space and naked awareness. In that moment, his mind stopped. The scream is not anger, but Zen compassion, not to offend, but to break. Break down the walls of thought, break down the ego that is trying to cling to concepts. It is katsu, a meditative shout used to wake the learner from the dream of thinking continuously. It's like a wake-up call in the middle of a dream. You're running, you're worried, you're engrossed in believing things that aren't true, and then suddenly someone calls your name out loud. You suddenly wake up and realize that everything in the dream is not real. Years later, when he was more mature, the young monk turned around and said, "Now I understand why you are screaming." Obaku smiled and replied, "Then forget that I shouted." Because even wisdom, if grasped, becomes a chain. Meditation cuts not only through illusion, but also through clinging to what is right. Obaku didn't say much, but his every gesture was like a blade cutting through the clouds. A disciple once asked, "What is the path to liberation?" Obaku just raised his fist. No explanation. But in that silence, there was the sky. The disciple bowed his head because he understood that the path was not in words, but in the direct, sharp, vivid presence of this moment, of that fist, of the breath he was having. We often expect wisdom to come in lightness, but in Zen, sometimes compassion is thunder, not a breeze. The scream was not meant to attack, but to wake up. It does not come from the ego, but from a deeper place, where there is no longer a screamer or a listener. Only the truth is revealed. An old story is still passed down in the monastery, telling of a quiet afternoon when the wind from the bamboo forest blows through the corridor, carrying with it the scent of moist earth. That day, a young monk was meditating in the middle of the hall, but his eyelids were heavy, his head was drooping, and his breathing was uneven. Drowsiness isn't just fatigue. It was a mist that wrapped around his mind, pulling him out of his consciousness. Obaku, the old master, walked lightly like a cat behind him. He watched without saying a word, then suddenly raised his meditation stick and slammed it the ground. The sound resounded like thunder, tearing apart the quiet space. The young monk jerked his body, his spine straightened, and his eyes widened. Obaku only said a small sentence like smoke. If I sleep all my life, I will dream about Zen, but I will never wake up with it. The monk bowed his head deeply. Since that day, he has never fallen asleep in the meditation hall again. Such moments are not cruel. They are a form of kindness that does not come with comfort. For comfort lulls people into pleasant dreams, and Zen needs awareness like a knife cutting through the fog. It's like a person drowning in shallow water. You don't throw them a swimming book. You pull them to the surface, sometimes a little rough, but it's all because they need to be alive. So does the sound of Obaku's stick. A hand tears away from illusion and pulls the person straight back to the real moment. Not all doctrine comes as gently as a lullaby. There are teachings that come like a sudden storm, like cold water hitting your face, like a sound so loud that it dislodges the currents of thoughts that have taken root in your mind. Truth does not need jewelry, does not need to be wrapped in sweet words. It just needs to be heard. And sometimes compassion is not caressing. Sometimes compassion is an interruption with the old line of thought, a way to break the years of living in the modest coat of the self-considered enlightened self. Obaku does not teach philosophy. He teaches freely. And freedom sometimes begins with a sacred, sword-sharp scream. If a person leaves Zen with only beautiful quotes, they are missing out. If they remember the story but have never felt that something in them is moved or cracked, they are still dreaming. But if there is a weak spot in the heart, the deepest place suddenly shakes, like the surface of a lake touched by the wind, then it is possible, very likely, that he has already begun to wake up, even just a little. In the same monastery lived an old monk, the oldest known to everyone. No one remembers exactly when he arrived. He was in front of the current abbot before the bell tower was erected, before the bamboo forest behind the kitchen was rooted in the ground. Everyone called him Elder Wen. His brown robe was patched up many times. His back was curved like an old bamboo branch, but his eyes always shone with a gentle smile, as if he had seen the truth a long time ago and never forgotten. He did not teach the Dharma, did not lead meditation, but every morning he lit incense before dawn. Every afternoon he waters moss around the rocks in the garden. Every evening he swept the meditation hall with an old broom, each movement in harmony with his breath. Anyone who passes by him may not notice. But if they stop for a moment, they will feel the peace radiating from him, as gentle as the warmth of an oil lamp in the middle of a cold night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped going to the hall. He no longer lit incense, did not water moss, did not walk slowly through the corridor. He was lying in a small room next to the main hall, on a simple straw mat, his hands on his chest. He was preparing to leave this life. The news spreads as fast as the wind. The young monks whispered worriedly. The mourner, the panicked, the one who avoided the truth by being busy with work. But one by one, they all visited that room. No one wants to miss the opportunity to ask for one last teaching. They expected him to say something profound, a secret of Zen, a final guide to illuminate the path. But Elder Wen said very little. He just smiled, a smile that had not faded for decades. A young monk sat down by the bed, trembling slightly, and then asked, "Master, aren't you afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes, narrowing as if he was looking through the question. "Afraid of what?" he replied quietly. "Leave," the monk whispered. Elder Wen laughed. The laughter was soft, like a drop through dry leaves. "Where are you leaving?" he asked, and then looked around the small room. The wooden walls, the light shining through the doorway, the cup of cold tea resting on the low table. Where did I come from? Where did I leave? Another monk asked him what everyone was thinking. "Please teach me one last time." Elder Wen closed his eyes and opened them slowly, stretched out his trembling hand and pointed to the teacup. The cup was only half full. The tea had long since cooled, but the afternoon sun shining on the surface made the surface shine. He smiled again, then closed his eyes. That evening, he left. No pain, no struggle, like a candle extinguished by its own thin smoke, serene and silent. The monastery held a funeral, chanting, and took his body, wrapped in white cloth, into the bamboo forest behind. But what makes everyone remember is not that ceremony. It was the last smile. This story becomes a lesson in fearless death. The final bow, not before death, but before life itself. Elsewhere, people prepare for death with paperwork, hospitals, and quiet anxiety, as if death were something strange to be avoided. But in Zen, death is a mirror. It indicates whether you are actually alive or not. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had been practicing death all his life. Every time he lets go of his frustration, every time he gives way to a young person, every time he puts his ego aside, he dies a little and lives a little. A cup of tea was his last teaching, an object that is too ordinary but contains the whole Dharma. The cup is important because it is empty. It holds, receives, and then lets go. If you cling to the cup, you will miss the taste of the tea. If you're afraid of breaking, you never dare to enjoy what it contains. Elder Wen has drunk all his life, so he didn't hold on to the cup. A Zen teaching says, "Let death come as a guest." It's not for us to look for it too soon, but so that we don't turn our backs on it. We live with death as a silent friend, reminding us not to waste every breath. Elder Wen's room was empty now, but the moss he had watered was still green. The broom was still leaning against the wall, and the clean teacup was lying on the table. And his smile lives on in the memories of those who sat next to him when he passed away. They understand that silence is not about running away, but about absolute trust in life. You don't need to be afraid of the end. As long as you live until then, you can look at it with a sigh and a smile. In the long journey through the quiet regions of Zen wisdom, there is a story that is often repeated, not as a mere lesson, but as a mirror that reflects on the true nature of value and awareness. The story goes that in ancient times, There was a kingdom that valued wisdom as much as gold and silver. In the courts, the king invited not only the nobles, but also the monks and sages, who saw the world through a lens that was wider than any scroll. Children in that kingdom not only learn math and writing, but are also taught how to think, how to see things from many directions. Among the most respected was a wandering teacher who was simply called the Buddha. He wore no precious jewelry, no brilliant clothes, nor did he need to raise his voice to attract attention. But every time he spoke, even the birds on the roof seemed to stop to listen. One sunny day, in the small square of a village nestled on the banks of the Ganges, where the wind on the water carried the whispers of bamboo, the Buddha told a story not for fun, but to open a door to the profound truth. The story begins with a noisy debate between a group of scholars gathered under an ancient fig tree. They come from many different regions, bringing with them different traditions and teachings. Some are Brahmins with long-standing knowledge. Some belong to new, enthusiastic, and ambitious denominations. Some carried scrolls of treatises that still smelled of ink. They argue about the soul, about the ego, about the afterlife, about the universe, about nothingness, about eternity. They assert that they are right, that others are wrong, that they are the only ones who can touch the truth. Passers-by stopped to watch. A merchant laughed slightly. A potter shook his head. A child pulling on his mother's shirt whispered that they sounded like crows fighting for grain. When the Buddha came, he did not intervene. He just sat down at the base of the tree and waited. It was only when those voices evoked fatigue, some from exhaustion, some from realizing the futility of dispute, that he spoke like a drop of water falling on the surface of a silent lake. Once upon a time there was a king, he said, who summoned 6 people who were born blind to a miracle. The scholars were silent. He said that the king led each of them before a giant creature they had never known, an elephant. The first person touched the elephant's flank, seeing that it was as wide and flat as a wall. The second person touched the stiff, curved tusk, confirming that it was a spear. The third person grabbed the life-filled proboscis, assuming it was a snake. The fourth person put his hand on the elephant's leg, believing that he was touching the trunk of a large tree. The fifth person stroked the soft ear, thinking it was a wide fan. The last one touched the tail, saying it was a rough rope. When they returned to the king, each thought he was right and the rest were wrong. They quarreled, fought, and were even about to rush into each other because of a small part of what they thought was the whole. The Buddha stopped to let the silence spread across the square. The scholars listened, as if the parable were hanging in the air. Then he said, "Every one of them has touched the truth, but only partially. When people hold on to one part and call it the whole, conflict is born." A young scholar frowned and asked, "Does that mean there is no truth?" The Buddha smiled gently, a smile that neither denied nor affirmed. "No. That means that the truth is broader than the closed mind. The person who touched the elephant's trunk and thought it was a snake didn't lie, but he couldn't see it either." An elderly monk, who had been silent since the beginning of the argument, bowed his head and asked, "So how do you see the whole?" The Buddha raised his hands open, as if catching a gust of wind. "By listening, by letting go of the need to be right. When you open your mind and heart, space is created for something bigger than yourself." The gentle wind shook the fig leaves above, as if agreeing. One elder, who was the toughest in the debate, leaned forward. I've spent my life defending what I think is the whole elephant. Now I wonder if I'm just holding the tail without knowing it." The Buddha replied, "If you could realize that, you'd have gone further than many people who are clutching ivory." That night, when the lights from the roofs shone down on the village road, the story spread like a gentle fire. Children reenact the scene of six blind people stumbling into trees, arguing over tree trunks or ropes. The elders sat in a circle, wondering what part of their lives were just touching a small piece and then mistaking it for the whole. The truths they had held on to too tightly began to become lighter. In a small house, a little girl asked her, "So, what does the whole elephant look like?" She smiled kindly. "Maybe we will never know it completely, but if everyone shares what they see, maybe we can get closer." And so the parable of the blind man and the elephant has been passed down through generations, not to say that belief is false, but to remind us that each belief is just a door that opens our perspective. The truth is not afraid of being seen from many sides. Only the ego is afraid. Zen Buddhism does not tell us to give up our understandings, but to let go of our attachment to them. Because when we take off the armor of the ego, we can listen to others, learn from them, and come closer to the elephant together, with a truth that is broader than any single hand can reach. And so the story continues to live as a reminder that wisdom is not in defending what we think, but in being able to open our hearts to see what we never knew. Centuries later, the story is still passed down in temples and schools, in sermons, and in rounds of debate that span years. It is told not because it is the strangest or most dramatic, but because it whispers a profound truth. No one sees everything, but together we can see farther, wider, and deeper than what a single pair of eyes can reach. In the town of Rajagaha, nestled among rough gray rocks and a mist as thin as the breath of morning, the streets wind like vines crawling through the hillsides. The Hammer Market is sandwiched between the ancient stone roads, where every dawn, when the golden sun tilts down on the tiled roof, the whole space wakes up with the sound of merchants advertising goods, the sound of temple bells ringing in the distance, and the blending aroma of ripe tamarind, burning incense, and hot, glutinous rice. Rajagaha lives in a strange harmony of mountain silence and the bustling singing of the city. But lately, that rhythm has been disrupted, not by plague, not by famine, but by something deeper, more primitive: fear. Not the king, not the soldiers, but the creature. The Nalagiri, the giant male elephant whose ground trembled and tilted with the weight of his footsteps. Nalagiri was once the free spirit of the northern mountains, growing up in the wild mist, bathing in rocky streams, and eating fresh forest leaves in the afternoon. But from an early age, it was captured and taken to the royal enclosure, where chains replaced freedom, where cold stone walls replaced trees and the open sky. The years of imprisonment accumulated into a smoldering fire in his heart, gradually burning the peace he had once had. It became restless, then angry, then dangerous. The strongest herders gave up, the guards shifted constantly, Maya, and every time Nalagiri roared, the entire enclosure shook. Its chains were getting thicker and thicker. The locks were getting stronger and stronger, but its cry was also getting more and more intense, echoing through the stone walls like dry thunder rolling in the empty sky. The people of Rajagaha whispered to each other that it had gone mad. But not everyone is afraid of Nalagiri. One sees in that rage not horror, but opportunity. It was Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, who was dressed as a monk but had a storm in his heart. Devadatta was jealous of the Buddha's calmness, jealous of his followers, of his teachings, of the reverence that people had for him. He wants power. He doesn't want the truth, wanting status, not wanting to be liberated. When his teachings were no match for the Buddha, Devadatta did not seek to improve himself, but sought to destroy what he could not achieve. So one evening, Devadatta went to King Ajatashatru, the proud young king, who was still enamored with power like freshly ground gold. They sat in the darkness of the palace, under the flickering oil lamp, and Devadatta bowed his head, close to the king's ear, and whispered as if pouring venom. "Release Nalagiri. Let it go towards the Buddha. See if his wisdom can stand up in the face of the tusks of a mad animal." The offer, however dangerous, had the appeal of a dark pastime, and when curiosity and childish pride arose, Ajatashatru nodded. So one dreamy morning, when Rajagaha was not yet fully awake, the heavy iron gate of the elephant enclosure was opened. The chains fell. Orders have been issued. Nearby roads were cleared in secret. And Nalagiri walked out, her eyes red, her breath puffing out hot breath, her mind rolling up like a storm of anger. It rushed straight into the main market. Cloth stalls flew around. The fruit box rolled out of the car. The shopping cart was splattered. Screams echoed through the streets. Children run away, adults fall over, dogs barked, carts overturned, dust flew blindly. Nalagiri doesn't go, it tears the world under her feet. And on that road, in the midst of the chaos, the Buddha was walking, barefoot, saffron robe as light as a cloud, holding only an earthen alms bowl. There are no guards, no weapons, nothing but stillness. His disciples hid behind the walls, behind the stalls, and cried out, "Venerable One, step back! The elephant is coming. It's going to crush you." But the Buddha did not stop. He did not walk faster, nor did he step back. He only walked as if he had entered a peaceful morning, not by recklessness or defiance, but by compassion great enough to touch even the most tormented souls. As Nalagiri approaches, the air is so dense that one feels like one can pick it up, ivory gleaming in the sun. Its trunk curls up like a giant whip. Its roar shattered the dawn. The mothers hold their babies tightly to their chests. The salespeople were on their knees. The whole city held its breath. But the Buddha still stood, his eyes as calm as the surface of a lake without ripples. Nalagiri rushed forward, the ground trembling under each step, and then a moment of silence more than a rock. The Buddha looked at Nalagiri, not looking at a mad beast, not looking at a living weapon. He sees a wounded soul, the chains of years, sees sadness become rage, sees the longing for freedom stifled until it turns into madness. He does not see the enemy. He was distressed. And Nalagiri, as he was about to trample on the person in front of him, met that gaze. Something slows down. Something softens. The wind stopped blowing. The fire in his eyes swayed. It slowed down, then stopped. The breath became choked like the voice of a neglected child. One more step. Then it stopped completely. The Buddha stepped forward, stepping lightly as if he had not touched the ground. He raised his hand, not to block, not to strike, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt down. Her legs were bent forcefully. Her head was bent low like a branch under the rain at the beginning of the season. A loud groan rang out from its massive chest, half crying, half sighing, half letting go. The Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's forehead, not for control, not to overpower, just to be present. The elephant cried. Large tears rolled through the dust, seeping into the rough folds of the skin. Its trunk wrapped around the Buddha's arm is no longer a weapon, but a surrender, a plea for forgiveness, a thank you. The whole Rajagaha stood stunned, silent as a stone statue. The elephant that once broke down the stone gate and trampled the forest tree now sits like a gentle elephant at the feet of the enlightened teacher. Devadatta, hidden in the shadow of a block, was silent. His scheme dissipated like smoke, defeated not by force but by a truth too light, too vast to grasp, and impossible to resist. When the sun rises, Nalagiri is taken back to the palace. No more pulling strings, no more whipping. It goes slowly, like a man who has found himself again. The Buddha returned under the familiar banyan tree. The bowl was still full, his robe was clean, and his steps were light. The people came not to hail him as a hero, but to ask, to understand. Venerable One, how did you stop it? Aren't you afraid? The Buddha smiled. Anger cannot be conquered by anger. Fear cannot be extinguished by violence. The wildness of a creature is often just a cry of pain. And so people understand that true strength is not in the fist or the sword, but in the heart that expands even in the face of danger. The story of Nalagiri is passed down from person to person, from paper to word, from word to temple, and then beyond time. The children asked their mothers, "Did the Buddha domesticate the elephant?" And their mother replied, "Yes, but not by miracle. By seeing the pain underneath the anger, seeing the fear hidden in the aggression, seeing the real person behind the mask." Nalagiri lived the rest of his life as a gentle giant. He rides children on his back, waters the temple garden with tree trunks, and stands still while the monks chant. It is said that when he died, the earth softened under his body, as if the earth was also mourning. Some say it is reborn in the heavenly realm. Someone said it came back in the body of a gentle disciple. But everyone agrees that in the calm eyes of the Buddha that day, an ocean of rage was calmed, not by war, but by peace. That day, there was a young monk who was struggling with his own fear, the fear of change. He's afraid of the end. The leaves fall, the season dies, youth passes, his favorite voice is gone. Every impermanence is like a loss. He reads sutras, studies the teachings, meditates every morning, but his heart still holds on to everything it is familiar with. One afternoon, his teacher took him out to sit on a large rock under a clear blue sky. The breeze was gentle and gentle. The air smelled of hay. Overhead, the clouds drifted leisurely. The teacher pointed up. "What do you see?" He replied, "A cloud." "Sit down and keep looking." They sit for a long time. Then the cloud changed. Then it dissolved, then disappeared. He sighed. "It's gone." He smiled. "The shape is gone, but its water remains. It becomes rain, into dew, into steam. It never ends. It just changes." And then, in the young monk's lap, a gentle knot was untied. The story of Nalagiri and the story of the cloud say only one thing. We are afraid of change because we think shape is everything. But beyond all forms, there is a space that never breaks, a space of understanding, of love, of seeing through the surface to get to the root of pain. We often cling to changing forms, thinking that they are ourselves. We think, I am this body, I am this name, this role, this relationship, this belief. And when those things disintegrate, we feel ourselves disintegrating as well. But the Buddha taught, all that is combined is impermanent. All forms will change, but emptiness remains. Emptiness is not an empty space. It is boundless spaciousness, as the sky embraces every cloud without being touched by them. The same is true of the human mind. Thoughts arise and then dissipate like the weather. When it is bright, sometimes it is foggy, sometimes it is thick, sometimes it is light. But the awareness that observes them is still there, intact, unshaken, immense. When we cry, the sky is not wet. When we laugh, the sky doesn't vibrate. And even when the ego seems to collapse, the sky just quietly watches. From the day he understood this, the young monk entered life with different eyes. When he saw a fading flower, he was no longer sad about its death. He saw the soft petals fall to the ground, become nutrients for the soil, then feed the ants, and then dissolve into fertility to feed future seeds. He sees its color fade in memory, but does not disappear. It spreads far and wide in the rhythms of life. He understood that nothing really ended. Clouds turn into rain, rain turns into streams, streams into dew, and dew returns to clouds. Humans are the same. What we call the self is just a cloud that is transforming, splitting, dissolving, but never disappearing. And behind all these movements is the sky, not the place, but the metaphor for the mind, wide, static, unchanging. Therefore, when asked about death, the Buddha always smiled. Not because he kept anything secret, but because the question of death was only a question of form. The truth cannot be grasped like holding a stone. It can only be recognized, just like the person who has been looking at the clouds suddenly recognizes the sky for the first time. After understanding this, the young monk wrote on the leaflet, "My thoughts are not me. My name is not me. I'm the gap between everything coming and going." And that awareness doesn't make life meaningless. On the contrary, it makes every moment more precious. Because the cloud is only beautiful because it is always changing. Love is only sacred because it cannot be fixed. So when you find yourself clinging to a memory, a face, an old version of yourself that has long since disappeared, stop. Lift your head and remember that you are the sky. It's all just fleeting weather. And now, as we step deeper into stories as light as the breath of Zen, we come to a story about transparency and the true value of giving. The ancients said that if you look at the full moon long enough, you will see not only a silver light, but also a tiny, slightly crouched silhouette, blending in the light, as if a soft curl of hair is twisted against the background of the moon. It is a figure that has been told by people for generations. The story of the forest hare and the extremely simple but noble gift. In those days, when the Buddha lived many lifetimes ago for countless lifetimes, there was a time when he was not a prince or a sage, but just a small hare living in the deep forest. The forest was as peaceful as the breath of the earth. Tall trees drop generous shade. The stream flows clearly, warm as a bowl of honey during the day and cool as silk at night. In the woods where the sun shines down like a golden rain, there are 4 close friends: the nimble monkey, the gentle otter, the cunning jackal, and a small, quiet strand of hair. Every day they gather under an old fig tree, share food, tell adventure stories, laugh in the shade, and vow together to live a simple life and do good for all living things. Of the 4 people, the smallest, weakest hare had no talent or strength, but it was a place where everyone felt at peace. He talks little but listens a lot. It never holds anything to itself. Its silence gives the truth in the hearts of others room to bloom. One fine day, as they were sitting together, the hare said softly, "Tomorrow is a holy day, a day of giving. If someone comes to us in need, we have to give everything we have." The otter raised his legs and said, "I will catch fish from the stream." The monkey was excited. "I will pick the best mangoes, the softest figs." The jackal blinked. "I'm going to sneak into the temple and steal the curd and butter. The villagers won't know." They all laughed out loud. Only the hare remained silent. Finally, the monkey asked, "What about you, little friend?" Her hare looked up, her eyes sad softly. "I have nothing. We don't have claws to catch fish. We don't have hands to pick fruit. We don't have the intelligence to get food. I only eat grass. So if anyone comes with a need greater than I can invite, I will offer myself." All three friends were silent. The wind shook the foliage above their heads gently, and in some distant place, perhaps moved by the courage of the hare, the world shook very lightly. That night, when the sky opened to the stars, the supreme god Chakra heard the story. He wanted to know if there really was a small creature who would dare to give everything without asking for praise or reward. So the next morning, Chakra descended into mortality, disguised as an old Taoist, emaciated and hungry, his clothes tattered, and his eyes sunken from days of not eating. He approached the land where four friends were waiting for the holy day. "I'm hungry," he said, his voice as weak as the wind. "I've been wandering around for days without eating or drinking." The otter immediately offered fresh fish. The monkey offered the ripe mangoes that were golden. The jackal, with a look of pride, put down the butter and curd he had just taken. Finally, the hare stepped up. "I have nothing," he said quietly, "but I swore, and I can't let people go hungry." He turned to his friend. "Light a fire." All three were confused. But the hare just smiled. When the fire was kindled, the hare bowed to the old man. "I offer you the only thing I have, my body." And without hesitation, it plunged into the flames. But the fire does not burn. When the hare touches the flame, the light burns and then goes out like a bouquet of flowers blown lightly. In that instant, the old man disappeared, and Chakra in his divine form appeared, radiant as the dawn. His eyes were full of wonder and love. "O noble hare," said Chakra, "you have given without expecting it. All the worlds I've traveled have never had such a pure gift." He gently lifted the hare up in the palm of his hand. "I will not let you die. I will let your story live forever, beyond this forest, beyond this age." Saying that, Chakra raised his eyes to the sky and drew the silhouette of his hare on the moon. From that day, when the full moon hung over the long river, on the roof, on the sleeping children, one could see that soft little shadow as a reminder that the noblest gift was not gold, not rice, not ritual or beautiful words or ideas. The greatest gift is altruism. As time passed, monkeys, otters, and even jackals still told the story to their descendants. And every time the moon is full, the forest becomes strangely silent, as if in remembrance. Under the old fig tree, the space where the four friends used to sit was always clean and soft, as if the world was still waiting for the hare to come back and sit down again. The story of the hare is passed from mouth to mouth, from the eaves of the temple to the fire in the village, from teacher to student, from mother to child, from pilgrim to pilgrim, through forests, rivers, cliffs, across borders and time. It is said that if you ask an old monk who has lived his whole life under the canopy of a Bodhi tree, or an old storyteller who has been through hundreds of fairs, why the moon glows so gently, they can just smile, closing their eyes for a moment as if touching a very old memory, then whispered, "It is the light of a hare of the forest, still giving, still observing, still reminding us what it means to love completely." Because throughout the past 1,000 years, it has been understood that generosity is not measured by scale, but by heart. A grain of rice may be as light as dust, but when given with sincerity, it weighs heavier than gold. And of all the gifts told in ancient stories, lotuses, incantations, amulets, wands, there is no greater gift than the freely offering of oneself, without demanding, without fear, without expecting to be recognized. Enlightened beings from ancient times used to say that before time was measured by the movement of the stars, before mountain ranges were named, before the sutras were written down in leaf, there was an oath, a single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the deepest part of suffering. I will not enter nirvana until all sentient beings are free. That is the prayer of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion. He is not a god who created thunder, nor is he the Messiah who embraces the universe, but a being who listens to the cry of the world and refuses to turn its back, even when the world is full of suffering. In Sanskrit, his name means one who hears the cries of sentient beings. In China, he is Guanyin, the gentle mother of the 10 directions. In Tibet, it is Chenrezig with gentle eyes looking down at the valley of snow. In Japan, he is Kannon. His face is like a gentle spring rain. He sometimes appeared as a man, sometimes as a woman, sometimes transcending all limitations because compassion was not gendered. It is a natural reaction of the heart to touch the suffering of others. Don't hesitate. Don't consider whether you can afford it or not. Simply take action. From countless previous lives, Avalokiteshvara has worked tirelessly in the heavenly realms. He lifts up lost souls, heals broken souls, guides the blind, wipes away the tears of mothers who have lost their children, opens the way for those lost in anger. But the world is vast, the suffering is immense, and every time one being is free from pain, 10 other beings fall. He takes care of one heart, and another is broken. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood on the edge of reality, looking down at the world. All the cries echoed at the same time. The sound of a child starving for milk, the sound of a father losing his crop, the sound of a wife losing her husband, the sound of a trapped animal, the sound of a lost man in anger. He heard it all in a moment that seemed to be endless. And at that moment, the unexpected happened. His heart was broken. Not figuratively. It literally breaks into pieces. His body was separated, his head was shattered into 11 parts, and his hands were broken like branches battered by a storm. His prayer was too big, the suffering of the world was too immense, and in that moment he whispered, I have failed. But the universe is always listening. As soon as Avalokiteshvara touched the edge of despair, Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of immeasurable light, appeared, not with a majestic flash of light, but with the tenderness of a mother who lifted up her stumbling child. He picked up every piece of Avalokiteshvara's broken body, looked at them with loving eyes, and said, I am not broken by weakness. I'm broken because my heart is too big. Then, with a breath as light as the wind touching the surface of a lake, Amitabha transformed that shattered body into a miracle. 11 heads to look in 11 directions, 1,000 arms with an eye in each palm, to see and act at the same time. Those arms can lift, protect, share, cut through illusions, sow lotuses, hold books of wisdom, pick up suffering beings, and sometimes simply touch someone's shoulder in despair. Avalokiteshvara is reborn not to become more majestic, but to love more. That is why he did not leave this world, because compassion doesn't need to win. It just comes up, repeats, doesn't give up, especially when everything seems hopeless. It is said that a monk once asked his teacher, what is Guanyin doing with so many hands and eyes? He smiled. It's like a person in the night unconsciously reaching out for a pillow. He did it out of nature. It's the same with compassion. No judgment, no pride, no waiting for a request, no waiting for a favor. It just flows out like water. Each hand of the Avalokiteshvara symbolizes a form of love, protecting, guiding, enlightening, soothing, healing, letting go, uplifting. In another image, he has only two hands, one hand holding a lotus flower, a symbol of purity reaching out from the mud. The other hand holds the orange pot, the healing water that never runs out. Even two hands are enough to change a person's life, if guided by compassion. To follow the path of the Bodhisattva is to follow Avalokiteshvara, not to become great, but to be kind, not to leave the world, but to stay for others. When true compassion grows, the boundary between me and you dissolves. There are no more helpers and helpers. Only the right action remains. If you've ever felt like your heart is too soft for the world, if you're prone to tears when you see someone in pain, if you choose to love even when you're disappointed, you're not weak. You're just waking up. And you are on the same path as Avalokiteshvara. In the midst of all those legends, there is another story that happens not in the Buddha's heaven, but right in the middle of a wealthy city. There lived a man named Viran. He had everything everyone else could dream of. Land stretching all the way to the riverbank, granaries full of gold, jeweled guitars, and banquet halls with gemstone inlaid walls. The rare fragrance burns day and night in the copper oven, never extinguished. But Viran couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned on the silk bed, his mind as hard as a long-locked door. The more he had, the more he felt lacking. The more he owns, the more afraid he is of losing. Every night he counts his possessions as if he were counting his own insecurities. One morning, stepping down from the jade-inlaid carriage, Viran saw a beggar sitting by the temple gate. His shirt was worn, the bowl in his hand was empty, but his eyes were calm, clear and calm, like the surface of a windless lake. Viran looked at him with displeasure. "If I had nothing," he said, "I wouldn't be able to smile like you." The beggar bowed his head. "If you really have nothing, you will know peace." Those words followed Viran all day, haunting more than the sound of money falling. That night he drank, he bought new silk, he threw a party, but nothing could wash away that statement. The next morning, Viran returned to the temple. The beggar still sits there, motionless as a statue, but as vivid as breathing. Viran asked, "How do you sit as if you own the whole world?" The beggar opened his eyes and smiled. "I don't own the world. I just don't let the world own me anymore." That sentence was like a slight touch that made the shell in Viran's heart crack. That day, he left the ring. The next day, he left a jade belt. Then piece by piece, he quietly left all his belongings in front of the temple stone steps. The beggar never asks why, nor does he show any appreciation. He just sat there, like a mirror. Weeks later, Viran returned in a coarse cloth shirt, barefoot, and a light body. He sat down next to the beggar, closing his eyes. There is no longer the call of gold, of fame, of fear, of desire, only breathing. There was only a silence that he had never touched in his life. He asked softly, "Have I become poor now?" The beggar smiled gently. "No, you have become free, and it's the story of true wealth. Something that doesn't sparkle, but glows from within. Like the moonlight that bears the mark of a hair that once vowed to give itself to kindness." The Buddha once taught that the root of suffering is not how much we have, but how much our mind is attached to. A person who possesses only a few things can be severely bound, while a person with an abundance of wealth can walk around leisurely if his mind is not occupied. The beggar is not rich in gold and silver, has no house, no status, but he has space in his heart. He has a deep breath. He has a peaceful presence that nothing can take away. He doesn't belong to anything, not even to his own suffering. And the parable reminds us that you are not the number in the bank account. not the reputation that people talk about, not the wardrobe or the number of followers. You are the one who knows them, the one who breathes through all the gains and losses, the one who has the ability to let go. Letting go is not a loss, but a choice. When you no longer need an object, a fame, or a compliment to feel complete, you are free to enjoy it or leave it without fear. That is the greatest wealth. The old Zen masters had a saying, "When I have nothing, I have everything." It is not about poverty, but about empty hands, not crammed with fear, control, clinging. When the hand opens, new life can flow in. Whether you have a lot or a little, ask yourself, are these things serving me, or are I serving them? If they fall apart tomorrow, will we shatter with them? Or am I still that presence, that breath, that open sky? True wealth is immeasurable. It is felt by the generosity of the mind. The mind can sit next to a full or empty bowl and still smile equally. Get rich that way. And with each step on the path of awakening, a new lesson opens up. Now it's a story of awareness, about yourself, about others, and about what's really worthwhile. In the days when animals could speak the language of wind and trees, there was a turtle that lived in a large, sparkling pond on the edge of a small village. The water is crystal clear as a mirror. The fish swim in silver streaks. The dragonflies sparkle like small light blades. Under the moonlight, frogs sang a chorus, forming a concert that no human instrument could match. In the midst of all that life, a lazy turtle floats on a warm, flat rock with a clever head and a blade as sharp as a knife. It observes sharply, even sometimes wisely, but it has an incurable weakness. It can't stop talking. It is said that in a previous life, the turtle was a sage who liked to explain. So in this life, he spends all day advising fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and scolding other turtles for perching on the reeds for too long. It talks about the stars. It talks about the weather. It talks about the stupidity of man and the arrogance of birds. At first, every creature listens with interest, but over time the fish gradually dive deeper to avoid. The frog coughs politely and then jumps away. The dragonflies looking for quieter lotus leaves to rest. Still, the turtle speaks, even when no one is around, even when the other creatures are asleep. He spoke not because he wanted to be heard, but because silence was like drowning death to him. A harsh summer came. The rain did not return. The sky cracked without letting go of a drop of water. The pond shrinks day by day. The fish drift into deeper areas, in smaller numbers every morning. Then one day, 2 wild geese flew by, saw the shallow pond, and went down. They land next to the turtle, dipping their beaks in the remaining thin mud. "This place won't last long," one said. "Soon it will be completely dry." The second one nodded. "I should help anyone who survives." Turtles, though proud, are curious. He swam back and asked, "Help? How?" The first goose replied, "We will bring the small fish to the deep waters. If you want, we can take you too." The turtle's eyes opened wide. "Really?" "Of course," said the second goose, "but only if you can keep quiet. We would clamp the ends of a stick in the beak, and he bit it in the middle. If you say just one word, you'll fall." The turtle hesitated. "Didn't you talk during the whole flight?" He watched as the pond was drying up. His friends were gone. The mud was cracking. He took a deep breath and replied, "Okay, I will be silent." The next morning, the 2 geese returned with a sturdy stick. They clamped the ends with their beaks, and the turtle bites in the middle with all determination. And so they flew up. The wind blew through the tortoise shell, and the scenery expanded under his feet. He had never seen the world like this. The forests stretched like blue waves, the rivers winded like silver wires, the hills and mountains rounded like sleeping animals. Down there, the villagers looked up in amazement. A child shouted, "A flying turtle!" Then the laughter spread. A man covered his eyes. "It's so strange. A turtle thinks it's a bird." The sound of mockery was like a wave. The turtle's mouth squeezed the stick. In his head, hundreds of sharp rebuttals rang out that he wanted to say. He wanted to teach the fools down there a lesson. It wants to prove its wisdom. And then he couldn't stand it anymore. He opened his mouth to say, "I'll show you who's stupid." But as soon as he opened his mouth, it fell. A brief slide, then plunged into the sky, spinning in the air with cold remorse. It hit the ground and the shell cracked, never to get up again. The two geese circled in the air, regretting but helpless, and then flew further into the distance. Villagers are silent next to the broken shell. From there, the story spread to the monasteries. A monk asked the Buddha, "The tortoise's fault is pride, isn't it?" The Buddha shook his head gently. "No, it's attachment, not with the body, but with its voice, with the thought that everything it thinks must be uttered." He looked at the monk and said, "Knowing when to speak is wisdom. Knowing when not to speak is even greater wisdom." So the story of the turtle that cannot be silent is told from village to village, not to ridicule, but to remind that words are seeds. They grow even when we forget we have sown. And sometimes, just one wrong word at the wrong time can make people fall like stones. Restraint is not weakness. It is the power that is hidden in the form of silence. And sometimes, silence is the greatest wisdom a soul can learn. Every morning, just before dawn, stretched himself from the edge of the horizon, the man appeared at the corner of Main and River Streets, sitting cross-legged, with his back straight as an old pine tree that never succumbed to the wind, wrapped in an old gray coat that had long torn buttons. He was called a homeless monk, although no one was really sure if he was a monk or not. No one knew his real name, nor did anyone remember when he first appeared on that street corner. He seemed to be there all the time, as a part of the city, like a street lamp so familiar that anyone would ever wonder where it began. Rain or shine, winter or summer, he still sat quietly under an old mural depicting the fading sunrise, but still fading the warmth of the early daylight. He never raised his hand to ask for money, nor did he hold up a sign to tell about his life or circumstances. There was only a small tin bowl next to it, sometimes containing a few coins, sometimes an apple or slice of bread someone had left behind, sometimes nothing but the sound of the wind passing by. But he never seemed to mind. Children were the first to pay attention to him because children always saw things that adults had forgotten. "Did he sleep?" one of the children asked his mother. "No," the mother said, "he must be meditating." But the child, with the clarity that adults have lost, whispered, "It looks like he's listening to the whole city breathe." A barista at a nearby cafe leaves him a pie every Wednesday. The florist would occasionally put a white lily in his bowl. An old accountant, getting a little older every year, once gave him a shawl in the cold of January, but he gave it to someone else who was colder than he was. Someone ridiculed him. Someone in a luxury BMW looked through the glass window and shook his head. Lazy. A teenager wearing headphones frowned. That's weird. But there are also those who, even if they pause for half a second, still feel in his silence something like a mirror. They looked at him, then at themselves, as if the calm reminded them that there was a part of them that was still running too fast. One afternoon, a reporter tried to interview him. She took out the microphone, asked for his name, asked his hometown, asked why he was sitting here. He only opened one eye, smiled softly, and said, "I don't own anything, but I belong to everything." Then he closed his eyes and continued to be silent. That story was never broadcast. There is no climax, no drama, no view. But for those who had stood in front of him for just a few seconds, they saw something else. Time seemed to slow down around him. Not really slow, but slow in the way that people, when standing near him, put down their phones on their own, looked up at the sky, looked at the traffic, and stopped unconsciously. It was only for a moment, but it was enough for the world, which was so hungry and thirsty, to temporarily forget its own noise. There is a teaching in Buddhism that says that giving up does not mean losing, but seeing clearly what we do not inherently need. Some thought he had lost everything: a roof, a job, maybe sanity. But there are also those who think that he is just letting go of the ego, letting go of the invisible struggle that everyone pursues, letting go of the illusion that happiness lies in accumulation. One day, a man in a straight suit stopped and asked, "Don't you want anything more?" This time he opened both eyes. "I already have it." "What's there?" the man asked. "The sky is clear, a light breeze, and a mind that is no longer hungry." He did not preach, nor persuade anyone to follow his path, but his presence became a wordless sermon every day, as a reminder that peace is not a destination, but a decision. Then one morning, he disappeared. No goodbye, no trace. There is only a faint dent left on the cement floor where he once sat. The mural behind seemed to fade a little more, but someone had painted a small lotus in chalk right where the bowl he had placed. The barista still leaves the pie every Wednesday. The florist still stopped by. The old accountant, now retired, sometimes sat by that wall to meditate, not to be someone else, but to remember who he was before the noise of life. That city, that street, in the midst of hustle and bustle, still retains the memory of a man who possesses nothing but the ability to give it all, just by silence. Not far away, at the corner of Maple and Fifth Streets, there is a small cafe that has never advertised a day. There were no neon signs, no glittering electronic menus, just a blackboard placed in front of the door with the words in chalk. "Come in, breathe, just take a slow sip." The inside of the cafe always smells of cinnamon and freshly ground espresso, like an old song that no one remembers the name of, but everyone knows it. Behind the counter is Raya, the bartender who is never in a hurry. She wasn't slow because she was lazy, but because her every movement was deliberate. Scooping, pressing, steaming, pouring, placing cups, cleaning the counter. It all happened as a ritual she had done thousands of times, but still cherished as the first. Customers feel it. People come in a hurry, multitasking, but leave more slowly, breathlessly. Because somehow, in the line of people every morning, Raya makes time seem to pause. She wore no uniform, only a soft linen apron and a small bronze bell on her wrist. The bell doesn't ring all the time. It only sounded faintly when she turned around, placed the cup, or waved her hand to wipe the last drop of milk on the counter. The sound is small, but always deliberate, like a comma in a long flowing sentence. One day someone asked her, "What is the bell for?" "Decoration?" Raya smiled, shy but as deep as the surface of a well. "It's a reminder," she said, "to return to this moment." The bell was a gift from a traveling monk. One rainy morning, he walked into the restaurant drenched as if he had just walked through a storm, but his face was calm as if the raindrops were a blessing. He sat down, ordered a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in silence for an hour. When he got up to leave, he placed the bell on the counter and said, "Give it to me for your practice." At first, Raya didn't understand, but as the years passed, each bell turned into a call to her again. Back to the steam rising from the milk, back to the cool surface of the ceramic cup in her hand, back to the presence of the person standing in front of her. Ellie, a regular nurse at the bar, used to joke, "You're the only one who makes caffeine peaceful." Raya just laughed, but she understood. It is not coffee that brings peace, but attention. The Buddha once said, "When walking, only walking. When sitting, just sit. And most importantly, don't waver." Raya lives it in a world that is always addicted to wobbly. One afternoon, a man ran into the shop with almost interrupted breathing. His phone turned off. He was late for a meeting. He spilled a glass of water when he tried to talk two conversations at once. But Raya didn't blame. She put the cup down in front of him, very slowly. The bell rang. He looked up, and at that moment, he breathed. A breath he hadn't really felt in weeks. Just a second. But that second was enough to remind him that presence doesn't need hours. It just needs a moment of full attention. As the years passed, the cafe was still small, not opening more branches, not changing owners, but its walls were imbued with thousands of peaceful breaths of people passing by and returning. One morning, Raya did not show up. A small sign was placed in front of the counter. "Come back in 3 days. Practicing silence." Patrons read, nodded, and then sat down. When she returned 3 days later, they smiled, as if her absence was part of the lesson. Even the person who helps others to make peace needs to fill their own cup. Her bell was still ringing, still soft, still just enough. A small but powerful sound, like a reminder, "You are here. Stay here." And so, in the middle of that vast city, a street corner that once housed the silhouette of an unknown monk, a cafe hidden behind a simple chalkboard, a tiny bronze bell, and moments of silence from strangers. It all boils down to a story in which every sound, every breath becomes an invitation to return to the simplest of things, the present. Once upon a time, on an early morning when the golden sands of the desert were as cold as shoulders that had not yet awakened from sleep, there was a long road that ran from the edge of the world through the gray cliffs and sank into a valley full of darkness, where pilgrims told each other that no one could go completely unchanged. The road is not engraved on any map, for no one really knows where it begins or ends. It is only known that everyone who sets foot there carries the same wish: to find peace, to seek shelter, or simply to return to some distant home that they have long lost. The sun there hung like a red coal placed on the sky by some god to punish those who sought liberation. It burns the flesh, causes the lips to crack, melts even the most seemingly solid determinations. And the desert wind was no more pleasant. It drew sand into his eyes, blew his breath away, cut dry stones like knives into the soles of his feet, and made even the youngest travelers stop and reproach that the road was not only made to test them. Many people, so exhausted that their legs refused to take any further steps, sat down by the side of the road, their faces bowed, sweat covered with thin mist, and began to whisper to each other that perhaps this journey was meaningless, that perhaps they were foolish to have set off, that perhaps this road did not really lead anywhere at all. But then, like a miracle, like a dream bursting out in the middle of a burning noon, they saw it. A city ahead, white walls made of moonlight, high gates widened, flags fluttering as if beckoning. a shelter, a promise, a dream of stone. Hope rose in them like a cool spring rising from a rift. They stood up, then from getting up to walking fast, from walking fast to running, from running to cheering like children seeing their mothers in the market. Inside the castle, there is a fountain that is so cool that just putting your finger on it can feel life again. There is fresh food, soft bread, succulent fruits. There are beds that are as light as night dew, making anyone who puts their back on their back immediately fall asleep. And that night, for the first time in many long days, they felt safe, feeling that the arduous road had finally brought a reward. But the next morning when they woke up, something strange happened. The city disappeared. No more walls, no more gates, no more water, no more fruit. There is only golden sand, and the road goes on as if nothing ever existed there. And from the sky, a voice rang out, light as the wind, but as deep as the ground. This city is an illusion, a place created by compassion to help you continue on your path. Now get up and move on. It is the parable of the city of illusions in the Flower Sutra, a story of skillful means, of the power of benevolent illusions created not to deceive, but to save people. The city is not a lie. It is mercy in form. It is a whisper. I haven't come yet, but I'm tired, so I'll give you a place to breathe. The Buddha created that city not because he needed it, but because people needed it. Because the road is too long and the human heart gets tired easily. The traveler in the parable is each of us, those who begin the path of practice full of hope, reading, meditating, praying, practicing. Then at some point, I see slow progress. I see that the pain is still back. I see that the old wounds are still smoldering, that I feel that I have not changed as much as I expected. And then we have a moment of clarity, a moment of peace, a moment of profound enlightenment that we think is enlightenment. We hold on to it. We name it. We build a city in our hearts around it, thinking we have arrived. But the next day, the city disappeared. That tranquility disappears. And that's when the Buddha's voice whispered, "The peace you see is real, but it's not the end of the road. I've taken a break. Now go on." Illusion City is a gift of time. It is the abode of loving kindness. It is a light bridge to take us through the times when the heart wants to give up. Someone once likened this to a parent taking their children on a hike. When the child cries, the parents say, "Just a little more. There are surprises." The surprise may be just a blanket and a piece of cake, but it is enough for the child to recover, enough to make him continue to believe in the path. In Mahayana Buddhism, this temporary means are also sacred. Not all illusions are chains. Some are hands reaching out to save the drowning person, even if the hand is just a silhouette. The important thing is not absolute, but what is necessary at the right time. Like the travelers in the story, we all have our own illusory cities. A fleeting moment of enlightenment. Someone who was once a fulcrum, a belief that helped us through a difficult period. A practice that we thought would save us from all suffering. But then they disappeared. The wall collapsed. The gate is lost. The things that once saved us are no longer there. I panicked, but the Buddha whispered, "Go on." The path passes through comfort, but doesn't stop there. What we seek is not security, but liberation. Not the stop, but the end of the stop. Paradoxically, without those cities, we may never have the strength to move on. And that's why they're gifts, not mistakes. A Zen master said, "Enlightenment is real, but the first time I saw it, it wasn't the last. Thank him, and then let him go." Even the Dharma is a raft, not the end bank. The Buddha once said, "If my words help you, use them. If not, leave it. The City of Illusions teaches us not to cling to, even to the things that once saved us. Truth is always mobile, and we must move with it. Someone asked the Buddha, "How do you know you've reached the end of the road?" And he smiled, "When you no longer need to ask." And before that, let the cities come and go. Let the moments of peace be real, however brief. And when they're gone, greet them, thank them. Then he got up and walked on. The path continues through a forest speckled with golden light, where the sun's rays penetrate the tall teak trees like sky pillars and fall to the ground in small, shaky pieces. A group of monks walked quietly, barefoot, their minds turned inward. They traveled for 2 days, through fields, across shallow rivers, under the vast sky. In front of them, beside a small stream, the Buddha sat waiting like a mountain waiting for the wind, silent but full of presence. The monks approached, bowed their heads, and sat down on the cool roots of the old banyan tree. Ananda, who had seen a scene that made him feel heavy, asked, "Venerable One, why do people suffer more from the same wound? Why is the pain so great in their hearts?" The Buddha told the story of the man who was shot with 2 arrows. The first arrow is the inevitable pain, sickness, loss, old age. But the second arrow is what we shoot ourselves: anger, blame, the narrative we build around pain. The man cried out for the first arrow, which was natural. But when he starts asking, "Why me?" when he turns wounds into identities, when he curses heaven and earth, that's the second arrow. Ananda and the other monks were silent, sounding like the earth was turning the pages in their hearts. The Buddha continued, "Wise people still hurt, but they don't build their homes around pain." Rahula asked, "But if you are shot by an arrow, how can you not be afraid?" The Buddha smiled. "Fear is natural, but fear doesn't need to be a net that wraps around your whole life. The wind blows through the canopy as evidence." The Buddha pointed to the water. "It flows. It doesn't hold the shape. So does the pain. Let it go." An old monk who had been a warrior whispered, "I carry many arrows, not in the flesh, but in my memory." The Buddha nodded. "The past is full of arrows that I keep alive with thoughts. The future is full of arrows we imagine. Only the present is where there is an arrow, and it will also drift." When night fell, they sat around the fire, silent but not heavy, but clear. Rahula watched the moth circle around the fire, whispering, "The fire only burns what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes, and the words of the Buddha floated through the sky like the wind caressing the grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second arrow belongs to you. You can put it down. Years later, it travels the world, in books, in meditation halls, in psychological clinics, in mother-to-child stories, in the quiet moments of adulthood, in the midst of the chaos of life. One can give it all sorts of names: mindfulness, therapy, philosophy, neuroscience. But the essence remains the same. Pain is real, but suffering is something we add up. And on the long road of each human life, among the desert, the illusory city, and the forest of light, we learn step by step. Face an arrow, let go of the other, and keep walking, keep breathing, keep coming back to ourselves. No one knows when we will reach the end of the road, but each time putting down an arrow is a step. Each letting go of an illusion is a step. And every time we stop to breathe, to feel a little lighter, we understand that the path of liberation is not ahead. It lies in every step we take: a story, a wall, an ego. From the small collisions between thought and the outside world, from the first vibrations that we often don't notice, life opens up countless layers of waves. But when we learn to stop, recognize what the first arrow is. Just an event, just the wind blowing through the ground. And let go of the second arrow, which is our own interpretation, our reaction, our resistance. Then peace returns as quietly as breathing. That peace is not noisy, not brilliant, but as natural as a wound that heals itself, like the sun slowly rising on the other side of the vast green field, covering every branch of grass that is still covered with dew. The mist drifted on the ground like the breath of a dreaming world, soft as the breath of a child, passing and then disappearing without leaving a trace. In that corner of the meadow, where the trunks grew close together and the wind blew into gentle curves, there was a small flock of birds that lived as simply as a song. They are agile, light as leaves, and their fur is speckled with streaks of light that are both like the earth and the sky. They eat seeds, sing softly, and fly together as if a common thought is carrying the whole flock through the sky. In that flock, there is one bird that sees more than others, not because its eyes are brighter, but because in those eyes there is a memory of invisible flight paths, of patterns that only those who have traveled through many lifetimes can recognize. It was the Buddha of a previous life, but in the form of a small bird. It had no title, no special look. It lives in the herd in a quiet, humble way. Still, the other birds believed him because he saw what they missed and saw what was coming. Every day, flocks of birds fly out to the fields to feed. Every day they return, their wings beat like one, their hearts as light as clouds. But one morning, when the sun rose weakly behind the thin clouds and the light scattered like breath, the wise bird called the whole flock together. "There's danger coming," he said, his voice soft but firm. The whole herd was silent. "A hunter is nearby. He set a trap on the tall grass. If we're not careful, we'll get caught." The little birds panicked. A chirp? "Should we stop flying?" The wise bird shook its head. "Nope, but we will act together." It showed them how to escape if they fell into the net. If one was trapped, the rest had to immediately put their beaks under the net, lift them up, fly together. Freedom comes from synergy, it said. A young bird wondered, "Can we be so small?" The wise bird smiled. "Together, you lift many things that you can never lift alone." The next day, the trap was set as a warning. Hidden under the wet grass, nets lie in waiting. A few birds land without being seen. In an instant, the hunter pulled the rope, and the net tightened. The cry rang out, and the wings fluttered. But the wise bird's voice rang out, "Now!" The birds immediately rushed over, their beaks wrapped around the edge of the net, and their powerful wings beat evenly. The net is raised, as light as silk in the wind. Then, through the trees, they dropped their nets and flew freely again. The hunter stood in the distance, nestled behind the trunk of a tree. He rolled his eyes and muttered, "It's strange. I've never seen a bird do that." The next day, he returned, and the next day. Each time the net is raised, each time the birds escape. His frustration gradually piled up like smoke. One day he said to himself, "They're smart, but they won't be united forever." And he was right. Fear doesn't break the herd, but the ego can. One morning, two young birds quarreled. "You always land too close to me," one scolded. "And you always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices are high, sharp, and cut into the peaceful space. The other birds were confused and turned away. The wise bird walked over gently. "Remember, the net doesn't care who's right and who's wrong. It only cares who is divided." But the reminder fell into the hearts of the two birds like a pebble falling on a rock, impermeable. Pride has taken root. The quarrel continued. The next day, the trap was set again. And that day, 2 angry birds were the ones caught in the net. The birds rushed to their rescue as they had done so many times. But the 2 birds caught in the net were still grumpy, shouting, "You pull the other side!" "No, you're slow." Their beaks were intertwined, the wings were fluttering, the nets vibrated violently, and then tightened. In that chaos, the net is not raised. The hunter stepped down from the tree, and that time, not all of them escaped. The survivors gathered under a low fig tree, so silent that even the wind stood still. The wise bird is not angry, only sad. Together, we can lift even the things that want to imprison us. But alone, even a feather becomes heavy. The young birds bow their heads. The 2 of them apologize through their red eyes. And over time, the birds healed again. Traps are still dangerous, but the power of the herd when merged is greater than any net. The last hunter gave up. He went elsewhere, not understanding why the little birds had overcome his plan, but he knew he had lost. The wise bird stays around, always watching, reminding the birds that it's not the trap that catches them. It's that they forget that they're stronger together. The story, later, was recited in quiet monasteries under the swaying trees. The monks bowed their heads not for the birds, but for the truth they carried. Solidarity is not just consolation, it is survival. Because in life, the net will fall. But if we walk with one breath, a common beat, even the strongest trap will not hold us. Continuing on the path of insight and meditation, we come to another story about awareness and the hidden value that silence can bring. In a small temple nestled among pine trees and mist, there is a candle lit every morning. It stands alone in a shallow dish, unshielded, unprotected by glass. There is only a small, soft flame, fluctuating slightly like breathing. The monks walked back and forth. The fire was still there, small but durable. One morning, a draft blew through the window. The fire bowed low and then burst strongly, then trembled as if it wanted to be extinguished. The trainee sat nearby, worried, and was about to close the window. The old master put his hand on his arm. "Wait, let it breathe." The flame does not go out. It faded, trembled, and then stood upright again. After a while, the wind melted into the air like a horse drinking the river, and the fire returned to its original tranquility. The old teacher said, "This is my mind. This is my breath. This is my life." Candles are inherently fragile. A breeze can crush it. A careless movement made it disappear. But it is fragility that is power. It is not windproof, does not try to hold its shape. He just responded, bent down, and then stood up. He continued, "My heart is the same. It's not as solid as you think. It is a dance between wax, wick, and air, between emotion and breath. The wind is life, grief, joy, anger, love. I can't block all the wind, and I don't need it." The trainee asked, "What if the fire goes out?" The old master smiled. "Then I will light it again." That's what practice is. In the days that followed, the trainees observed the candle more. He began to see it bend fearlessly, to see its softness as a true source of stability. One morning, when the wind was stronger than usual, the fire tilted. But the trainees are no longer worried. He looked at it, and in the trembling light of the fire, something quieted in him. He understood that meditation does not teach us to stop the wind, but teaches us to bend with the wind without turning it off. The strength is not to stand motionless, but to be so soft that it does not break. We don't need to burn like a campfire, just enough light to see the next step, to light the way for the person next to me, to tell the darkness that I am still here. He once said, A candle burns with all its heart, and the world is still warm by its passing. Then be a candle. In a cafe near the park, where people come to find some peace or a little busy, there is a little boy sitting across from his mother. The table was small, just enough for 2 cups, a glass of hot chocolate, half, and a croissant missing a piece. The boy has soft curls, bright eyes, and shoes that like to glow every time he kicks his foot in a chair. He looked at his mother, expecting to see a response in his eyes, but her eyes were glued to the phone screen, and the blue light shone on her face like a cold moon. She nodded occasionally, but didn't look at him. The boy kicked his shoes again, hoping that the floor would shake so that his mother would look up. Nothing. Out there, the park is full of birds, joggers, rustling leaves. But he just wanted to hear his mother's voice. He tapped the spoon lightly on the glass. This time my mother raised her face, but only to say quickly, "Wait a minute." Then she returned to the world in the palm of her hand. And there, in the delicate silence between the vapor of chocolate and the sound of adult footsteps, another small candle is flickering. A child's soul waiting to be seen, waiting for someone to notice. There are no traps, no nets like the birds have encountered, but there is another, more silent type of loss. Loss of presence. The child is not bound by a rope, but by the absence of the person he loves. Just one look, a common breath, a word is enough to lift that invisible net. But the mother has not seen it. The boy looked up again, and this time, as a rare miracle, the mother put the phone down. She looked at her child. Her eyes softened. "What do you mean?" The boy's little world lit up like a candle that had just been lit. He smiled. "That's it. Like a flock of birds, like a candle in a meditation hall. Life sometimes only needs a moment of attention, of togetherness, of presence." In life, the wind will blow, traps will fall, and moments when we get lost will occur. But as long as we look back at each other, as long as we rekindle the light in each other, the world is warm enough to continue. This is not a story of blame. It is a story of oblivion, of the silent erosion of presence, and how a missed moment will not come back. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a stone. Not a fancy one, just smooth, gray, shaped like a drop of water. He gently placed it on the table. "Wait." She rolled up. He tapped it with one finger, rolled it into a small circle, whispered something to it. She didn't look up. The waiter walked by and smiled at the boy. "Is that your treasure?" The boy nodded. The mother did not hear. Presence is not always done. Sometimes it quietly surrenders. We trade it for urgency, for likes. As for the news, we can't change, and while a child sits across from us, glowing not with pixels but with life. The Buddha once said, "Don't live in the past. Don't dream about the future. Focus your mind on the present moment." But the present must be selected. It can't scream louder than the screen. Later that day, the mother posted a photo. "Hot chocolate with my little coffee heart. Grateful." The boy is blurred in the background. Looking at her, she never realized. One day, the rock is gone, replaced by a drawing. 2 stick shapes, one large, one small, fisted. The sky above them was filled with birds that looked like a wide V. He slid it across the table. She likes it. Say it cutely. Take a photo. Share it instantly. Don't ask what the birds are. Don't ask if the smaller character is sad. But the boy didn't say anything. Children know how to speak through absence. Presence is not just about being near. It's attention. It's seeing the person across from you as if this moment will never come again, because it won't. One afternoon, the boy stopped carrying his belongings. There are no stones, no drawings, only silence. He stirred his chocolate in slow circles, watched the steam rise and disappear. Looking at her eyes, she also disappeared. Then one day, the phone died. As soon as she reached for it, the screen turned black. The world is back. She blinked, looked around, looked at him. He stared back with wide eyes. Hope and doubt mingled in his silence. She reached across the table, grabbing his hand. For the first time in a long time, he did not withdraw. They sit like that for 5 minutes. Don't talk. Just hold now. When the waiter came to clear the table, the boy whispered, "She's back." The waiter smiled. "Yes, I see. Presence does not require perfection. Just noticed. Just came back many times, like breathing." Years later, when the boy was older, he would keep the old stone in a box. It would feel heavier than he remembered, not because of the weight, but because of what it had been trying to carry. The presence is fragile, but it's also forgiveness. One missed moment doesn't cancel the next. The child is still waiting, not for punishment, but in invitation. And the phone, it was still in her pocket the next time they came. Not because she hated it, but because she finally saw a better screen, a screen with his eyes. The monk sits alone in the temple courtyard. The wind gently brushed through the pine trees, stirring the fallen needles on the stone path. A bell rang out from afar, softly, fading, until the silence returned like a breath of stillness. It is here, underneath a sloping wooden roof and next to a moss-covered wall, that the first question arises. What is the sound of a clapping hand? It is not a puzzle. It is not meant to be solved as a puzzle. It is a koan that is spoken not to explain the truth, but to explain the mind which requires interpretation. Students who receive it are young. His name is not remembered, not because he is unworthy, but because these names cling to form and teaching point further. He bowed low to the old boss who had given it to him. "Sensei," he said quietly, "I'll reflect on it." Master nodded, but didn't say anything more. And students have gone out into the world, not to escape, but to listen more deeply. At first, he tried to reason. He sat in the zazen, his legs crossed, his breathing measured, his mind tense. He clapped with one hand against the wall. He patted himself on the thigh. He waved his palms in the air. None of them answered the question. Frustration creeps in. "This is stupid," he muttered. But the question remains, not like a stone blocking the way, but like a wind behind him that doesn't stop. What is the sound of a clapping hand? He talked to other monks. One person said, "It's silence." Another said, "It's the absence of duality." The third person just laughed and walked away. Students become tired. But one morning, while sweeping the yard with a frayed broom, he stopped. The wind blew into his cloak. The crow cried out from the roof beams and something softened. He tried to answer the question, but koan didn't ask. It's asking him to watch. A long time ago, during the Tang dynasty in China, a great Zen master named Haku taught in a small mountain temple above the rice terraces. His students came from all over the world. Some nobles, some peasants, are all seekers. One day, a scholar arrives dressed neatly and full of knowledge. "I have read the sutras," he said, bowing his head. "I studied philosophy. Now I want to understand Zen." Haku nodded once and poured him tea. The cup is full, then overflows. The scholar stepped back. "Master, the cup is full." "Yes," Hakuju said, "and so do you." The scholar blinked. "How can I show you meditation?" Haku asked, "if your mind is already full of answers." The scholar was silent. In Zen, emptiness is not lacking. It's readiness, not emptiness, but space. And koan are not doors to unlock, but mirrors held up to a part of you that cannot be named. Back at the modern temple, The young monk was told by his master, "Bring this koan." So he left the walls of the monastery and walked for days. He sat by the river. He listens to the windmill. He looked at the rice farmers, their hands drowning in the mud as prayers returned to the earth. In the rattling of chopsticks, in the rustle of the cloak, in the space between footsteps and breathing, he waited to hear it, the sound of a hand clapping. Years passed. Once he came back to his master and said, "It must be silence." The master shook his head. Another time, he said, "That's all." The master just smiled. "Keep listening," he said. In a seaside village, the monk worked as a fisherman, not to abandon the road, but to live it. He casts his net into the morning mist, watches the sky glow with dawn, and learns the rhythm of the waves as if it were a chant. One evening, a young boy approached him on the beach. "Are you a monk?" the boy asked. "I have," he said. "Are you still praying?" The monk nodded. "Yes, but not in words." The boy sat next to him. They watched as the tide pulled back the shells, kelp, and memories. After a long while, the boy whispered, "What are you listening to?" The monk smiled. He raised his open hand. "Nothing," he said, "and everything." Back at the temple, the teacher grew old. He no longer walks the garden path alone. The students brought him water, prepared meals, folded robes. One day, he called his disciple, the young monk, who was no longer young. They sat together under the pine trees. "Did you hear?" the teacher asked. The disciple nodded. No sound. However, the crows, the wind, the silence all echo a truth that goes beyond sound and silence. Master stretched out his hand and gently placed his palm on the chest of the disciples. "Not here," he said, touching his head, "but here." And then he laughed deeply, completely, as warm as the light of fire. In Zen, the sound of a clapping hand is not meant to be heard by ear. It is the sound of the mind giving up its struggle. The sound of the ego stops dividing. It's not a trick. It is an invitation to let go of the need for naming, to release the grip that separates one from that, oneself from others, sound from silence. Years later, the disciple became a teacher. A student asked him, "What is the sound of a clapping hand?" And the teacher did not answer verbally. He picked up a broom and swept the yard. He pours tea for his students. He sat down. He waited. And students listen. Zen is not intended to be explanatory. It invites you to experience, to sit still enough for the need for explanation to dissipate. The sound of a clapping hand is not something you hear. It's something you become when you let go of the illusion that there are two hands to begin with. There is no one answer that can give you that. There is only awareness, only presence, only the silent courage not to know. This is not a story of blame or debate of right and wrong, but a story of deep silence, of a kind of non-verbal understanding, of missed moments, and the silent oblivion of presence. In ignorance, one begins to recognize the subtleties that are often hidden beneath the surface of life. As people drift deeper into the calm waters of Zen, a wordless teaching arises, a reminder of true clarity and worth, which is not always easily seen with the naked eye. Listen softly, because this story has just begun in the midst of the recent monsoon rains and the Kasambi Forest Road evaporating with silence in the air. The leaves of the forest drip with silver beads like jewels of heaven and earth, and the sound of frogs echoing from the depths of darkness. All blend in the scent of wet bark and fragrant jasmine, like the breath that has been holding back for a long time. Under the towering sal tree, the Buddha sat among the monks who had walked for days to gather. Some of them are old, but most are still young, their new robes crumbling like the pages of books open with devotion, and their minds still sharp with profound questions. Today, the Blessed One has agreed not to talk about ethics or meditation in the usual way, but about something much more subtle: misunderstanding. He did not begin with words, but with a silence as dense as the breath of an old-growth forest. When a gentle breeze blew through the foliage, His Holiness slowly said, "There are people who come to the Dharma as a person looking for a serpent." A few monks glanced at each other, because snakes were not a small thing in this forest. Some were deadly poisonous, and some were worshipped like gods. He told the story of a man who heard that there was a snake living near the root of a large old tree, and so he was determined to go into the forest to find it. But this man did not learn the right way, did not carry a stick with a pitchfork, did not prepare well. He hurried, saw only movement on the grass, and rushed in with his bare hands. A few young monks sitting nearby leaned in silently, trying to hear better. The Buddha continued. He grabbed the snake by the tail, and immediately the snake wrapped tightly, fighting back violently. He was injured, in pain, and panicked. His Holiness paused, his eyes as light as the moonlight reflected on the calm water, and then said, "And it also happens to those who hold the Dharma the wrong way. They grab their tails, not understanding the deep nature of what they hold in their hands. When they are opposed by the teachings, they blame the teachings without ever realizing that it was their hands that caused the discomfort." Silence fell again among the monks. This is not a story to appease, but to wake up. Many of them studied hard, memorized every word, argued with pride, recited verses in the market and in the village, were ready to correct others, and were satisfied with their knowledge. But they forget that those words are not the snake itself, but only a raft to cross the river, a means, not an end. The Buddha knew that well. Kakana, a senior monk, bowed his head cautiously and asked, "Venerable One, how to keep the Dharma properly?" The Buddha nodded and replied with another image. Imagine a man who has to cross a river with a rushing current. The other bank is promising, but there are no boats or bridges. He collects twigs, reeds, and ties them up to make a raft. With it, he crosses the river safely. But when he gets to the other side, will he take the raft with him for the rest of the journey? Some people smiled, some hesitated. "No," the Buddha said. He left it behind, grateful and respectful, but didn't cling to it. The Dharma, too, is a raft to overcome, not a burden to carry forever, not a weapon to attack, not a badge to wear. A gentle whisper passed through the monks, but the Buddha continued. Many people hold the Dharma like a man holding the tail of a serpent, clinging to words, verses, and rules not to cross the river, but to shout from the other side. They say, "I know you're not right. This is the only way. Yours is wrong." They are proud to have read, memorized, and mastered it. But what did they really understand? A light breeze stirred the forest floor, and a spiral leaf fell like a wordless question. Understanding, he said, is not mechanical repetition. Wisdom is not memorization. The truth is not a medal to hold on to. Don't take the story. Learn how the snake moves. Be observant. Be quiet. Approach with care. Grasp it properly, not to possess, but to understand. A young novice, no more than 15 years old, timidly raised his hand and asked, "But, sir, what if one clings to the raft out of reverence and gratitude?" The Buddha smiled gently. Reverence is not the same as attachment. Gratitude flows like a river, and clinging is like a dam that stops the flow of water. He folded his arms in his lap and said, "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means respecting the purpose and moving on when it's done. Some monks bowed their heads in contemplation, while others were uncomfortable because the teachings seemed to dig deep into their pride. A monk named Sarti, known for his superhuman memory and rigid interpretation, frowned. "But sir, shouldn't we protect the Dharma from wrong views?" The Buddha replied immediately, "Yes, but first protect it from misunderstanding in yourself. A person who argues from the ego can win the argument but lose the way. If you know a sentence but use it to embarrass others, you've caught the snake's tail. If you teach only to improve yourself, learn only to be praised, keep rules to feel superior, confuse knowledge with wisdom, then you have kept the tail of a snake." The forest was so quiet now that even the sound of birds was silent. When the snake turned around and bit it, the Buddha asked, "You will say the teaching is wrong, that it frustrates you, that it is sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake is never to blame." A few monks bowed their heads in embarrassment. An elderly beggar sighed deeply. "I've grasped many stories in my life, but now I just want to learn to see clearly." The Buddha nodded. "That's the beginning of wisdom." That night, the sunset dyed the forest a brilliant yellow, and the monks quietly withdrew to the camp, without argument, without discussion, only with gentle footsteps and deep reflection. Sati, the monk with an excellent memory, sat alone by the fire, the manuscript scrolls empty, and a novice sitting next to him asked about the raft. Sati whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise, but now I wonder if I know how to listen." The Buddha's words echoed like a distant bell in the quiet forest. Don't catch the snake's tail. Learn how it moves. In the hearts of those who really listen, the Dharma gradually shakes off the scales of pride, the rigid form, and begins to breathe, as vivid as the breath of life itself. The story continues. A long time ago, in a kingdom surrounded by splendid mountains and temples, a powerful king ruled from a palace made of stone and gold. He was the terror of the enemy, praised by poets and thousands of faithful followers. His army stretched across the region, wealth covered the throne room, and his orders echoed through the city like thunder. But he still didn't feel at peace in his soul. Victory does not bring peace. The compliment fades quickly. Even sleep, though wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt empty. One morning, from a marble balcony overlooking the vast kingdom, the king shouted, "Who in this world is greater than me?" A servant quietly cleaning up nearby stopped his hand and said softly, "There is a person, sir." The king turned. "Who?" "A sage who lives in the woods, wears no crowns, no gold and silver, but it is said that he keeps the peace in silence more than all his generals." The king laughed. "Is a beggar in the forest greater than me?" But the servant's voice still echoed in his heart. That night, when the court was silent, the king rode his best horse, disguised in a simple robe, his face hidden under his hood, and left alone. He rode for 2 days through the jungle, through rivers and streams, past farmers, monks, and children who did not bow their heads. At last, at the edge of a quiet forest, he saw a small hut in the shade of a large tree, and on a flat rock, sitting cross-legged, was the sage. There were no guards, no palaces, no property, only silence and clear eyes that seemed to see through everything. The king asked, "Are you the one talked about?" The sage nodded. "I'm just one of many." The king looked at him intently. "You have no throne, no army, but you are revered by the world. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence lasted long enough for the king to hear his own echoes in his heart. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit down. The king hesitated, but then sat down. They sat together under the trees, the wind gently blowing through each leaf without words, without commands, only silent giving. After a long time, the king spoke up. "Are you not afraid of me?" The sage replied, "I did not see the king, only a man with the question." The king frowned. "I have conquered the land, defeated the enemy, shaped history. Do you think I have a question?" The sage met his gaze. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, then closed it, looked away, and was silent with the question in his heart. The story of presence, renunciation, and wordless understanding continues, like a serpent winding in the deep forest, unable to be held, only to be felt and respected with an open heart. True wisdom is not in what we know, but in how we know how to let go, listen, and live each moment to the fullest. Under the silky silk, under the crown of nobility, under the noise of the palace and the cheers of the crowd, the king came to the sage not to challenge or argue, but to seek something beyond power that he could not command or force. He sighed, his eyes full of concern, and finally asked, "Why are people following you? I didn't order them to do so, so why did they listen to you?" The sage picked up a small stone from the ground, rolled it back and forth in the palm of his hand, and calmly replied, "They listen because I don't need them." The king blinked, trying to accept the answer. "I lead the army. I command the cities. I have the power to decide life and death, but I still feel dissatisfied and empty in my soul." The sage nodded, his eyes filled with understanding and tenderness. "Because you confuse fear and reverence, between obedience and love, between wealth and true worth." The king was silent, his expression tense. "Do you mean I'm not strong?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. The sage gently replied, "True strength is not clinging, not shouting or fear of being forgotten." The two sat silently together again. A gentle breeze blew off the sage's robe, while the king looked down at his hands as if he were seeing something new. "I have everything," he sobbed, "but my heart is still empty." The sage smiled, like a friend who understood the whispers of the soul. "Then you're ready." "Ready for what?" the king asked. "To lead without having to sit on the throne." That night, the king returned to the palace unobtrusive, without making any statements, but there was a profound change in his soul. He began to listen more, talk less, ask questions instead of orders. Counselors whispered about his secret temple visits, about his solo walks in nature, about the change in the way he sat still under a tree without saying a word. When the generals asked, "Who taught you this?" the king only smiled, replying softly, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed away in silence under the same Bodhi tree, the king proclaimed a day of silence throughout the land. No work, no speech, only listening. Over time, his rule became a legend, not because he expanded his borders or won wars, but because he learned to let go and was no longer needed to rule. The story of the king and sage spreads like a cool breeze through the foliage of the forest, as a reminder that the crown is not a source of strength, but wisdom that is the true value, and that the one who does not seek domination is often the one who is most worthy to lead. The temple's library sits quietly, containing thousands of texts, tattered scrolls, faded sutras, faded notes written by hands that have turned to dust over time. During the day, the monks come to read books, enjoy the gentle light through the paper curtains, and the fragrance of old parchment paper adds warmth to the space. But there was a special monk who always came to the library at night. Her name was May. She was quiet, thoughtful, the type of person who listened longer than talked. Every evening, after finishing her work in the temple, May took a single candle, walked into the library, lit it, and read until the candle wax melted away. One rainy night, the wind roared across the hillside, and the dark clouds swallowed the moon. But May still walked into the library, lit a candle, and sat cross-legged in front of a scroll of paper that talked about emptiness. The fire swayed with each wind, but she kept reading. Outside, an owl perched on the awning, white feathers, big round eyes silent, watching her without blinking. As the wind swirled stronger, the flames bent and then extinguished, and darkness enveloped the entire room. May didn't panic. She closed her eyes and waited. A gentle rustling sound overhead, feathers fall down, and then silence returns. She opened her eyes and felt that the owl was still there, silently observing her. May whispered, "What do you see in this darkness?" At that moment, a verse from the sutra she had just recited came to mind. The eye that sees the truth is not flesh or fire, but a calm presence in the darkness. She smiled softly, realizing that the lesson was not in the light of the candle, but in its absence. The next day, May asked the abbot of the monastery, "Master, why are we so afraid of the dark?" He thought for a moment and then replied, "Because we only believe in what the eye can see. But true wisdom often lurks in the dark." He continued, "The owl doesn't need to light a lantern. It simply knows how to look." From that night onwards, May still carried the candle, but she learned to sit still after the candle had burned out. Not to read anymore, but to observe our breathing, thoughts, and even the discomfort in our hearts. Gradually, the darkness becomes a teacher, teaching her to wait and understand more deeply. Other monks noticed her change. May became calmer, speaking more slowly and softly when correcting mistakes, as if she no longer needed light to discern what was important. One night, an apprentice accompanied her in the dark, restless, and grumbled, "I can't see anything." May smiled gently. "It's the beginning, not the problem." She told him a Zen saying, "Don't curse the darkness. Don't worship the light. Be the eye that sees both." The owl never flew down or made a sound, but its lesson stayed with May for the rest of her life. Sometimes the real clarity is not about illuminating more, but about learning to sit still when the candle is out. With each breath, our journey continues through Zen wisdom, where even the smallest stone can contain the greatest truth. The next story begins every morning when May opens the curtains at 6:15. A soft and golden light pours through the window, shining on the photo on her gown. The old photograph, reddish-brown with corners curled up like autumn leaves, is of her late husband, a young, handsome, smiling man in uniform who left her 17 years ago. Miriam never left the photo where it was placed. Didn't cry, didn't say anything, just looked at it. Grief for her is no longer a furious storm, but becomes a part of life like the weather, something you wear on your body without having to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why didn't you get rid of that old photo? You have newer photos on your phone." Miriam just smiled. "It's not for searching, it's for remembering." Her husband had passed away in his sleep without warning or pain, just endless silence. She found him one morning, his hands still bent as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, she didn't collapse, but sat beside him, grabbed his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong, but she didn't try. She simply kept walking. At a nearby temple, Monks preach about impermanence, about constant change, and that attachment creates suffering. Miriam understands that it is not theory, but living reality. She loved her husband, but did not hold on to him. In his absence, she let him go, and in that indulgence, he never really left her. There is a teaching in Zen that teaches that to hold a butterfly, you have to open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a temple to herself or tell sad stories over and over again. She just lived in a way that made him proud. She took care of the garden they had cultivated together, making coffee the way he did, folding the last of his shirts and giving them away, not because she was no longer in love, but because she didn't want love to be a captive cage. One day, the neighbor who had lost her husband came to her. Her eyes were red and her voice was trembling. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured her tea, sat next to her, didn't say anything at first, and then said softly, "You don't live without him. You live with his part that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed, and Miriam just put his hand on hers, leaving it alone. Love doesn't end, it just changes shape. And grief is also a form of love that knows how to bow its head. Miriam was old now, her hands soft with age, her memories fragile, but she still opened the curtains every morning, letting the light gently touch their, not to call him back, but to help him go again, gently and lovingly, not trying to hold on. Meanwhile, in another place, Siddhartha abandons the silk and vermilion of the palace to enter the world of vagrants, beggars, and sages, whose ribs are exposed like cages, and whose eyes sparkle between discipline and delusion. He sought out teachers who were accepted for their sharp minds and pure souls. Siddhartha studied with Arata Kalama, who taught about the invisible meditation realms, where consciousness floats like light on a still lake. With gentle breathing and deep concentration, Siddhartha reached those realms of meditation. His mind became wide, thinking slowly like clouds drifting through a calm lake. He immersed himself in that state for hours and days, without fear or deprivation. But when he opened his eyes, he noticed the truth. Although the body was at peace, the suffering had not ended. The world is still the same. Famine still befalls the poor. Old age still makes farmers hunch. And that's when he realized that enlightenment is not just inner tranquility, but also a deep perception of the surrounding existence and suffering. He continued on the path of seeking understanding, not only to escape himself, but also to help others overcome the sufferings of his life, to find peace not only in the heart, but also in life. The story continues, a never-ending journey, where every breath and every step leads to a deeper understanding of the nature of existence, of loving and letting go. Under the soft silk, under the splendid crown, amidst the noise of the court, he did not come to test the sage, but to understand something that power could not give. He asked, "Why are people following you? I didn't give them orders, so why did they obey?" The sage picked up a small stone, rolled it in his hand, and replied, "They listen because I don't need them." That sentence made the king blink. He used to lead the army, command the city, and take the power to kill, but still feel empty. The sage nodded gently. "You confuse fear and respect, between obedience and love, between wealth and value." The king stiffly asked, "You mean that I am not strong?" The sage replied, "True strength does not cling, does not scream, and is not afraid of being forgotten." The two of them were silent in the wind, stirring their robes. The king looked at his hand and said, "I have it all, but it is still empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready, ready to lead without having to stand at the top." That evening, the king returned to the palace, unostentatious, undeclared, but something had changed in him. He began to listen more, talk less, ask questions instead of orders. Counselors whispered about his temple trips, his solo walks, the sudden interest, as he sat under the tree in silence. When the generals asked, "Who taught you?" he simply said, "A man who had nothing, but showed me everything." Many years later, when the sage left the earthly realm in the shadow of the Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of silence throughout the land. Not working, not speaking, only listening. His rule was not because of the expansion of borders, but because he was no longer needed. Not because he gained much, but because he learned to let go. The story of the king and the sage spreads like the wind through the leaves of the forest, reminding us that the crown is not a source of strength, but wisdom. He who does not seek to rule is truly worthy of leadership. The library in the ancient temple contains thousands of texts, torn scrolls, faded prayers, and comments smudged with ink from hands that have turned to dust. During the day, the monks read books under the light that seeped through the paper curtains, and the scent of old parchment warmed the atmosphere. But there was a monk named May who always came at night. She was quiet, thoughtful, listening more than talking. After finishing her chores, she took a candle into the library and read until the wax melted. One night of fierce rain and wind, stormy clouds obscuring the moon, May lit a candle, sat in front of the scroll about emptiness. The flames flickered in the wind and then went out completely, and darkness enveloped them. Fortunately, she was not afraid. She closed her eyes and waited. She heard a slight rustle on the eaves, feeling that the white owl was still watching her in the dark. She whispered, "What do you see in this?" And a sentence in awe echoed in her mind. The eye that sees the truth is not flesh or fire, but a calm presence in the darkness. May smiles, understanding that the lesson is not in the candlelight, but in its absence. The next day, May asked Master, "Why are we afraid of the dark?" Master replied, "We only believe in what we see, but wisdom often awaits in the dark. The owl doesn't light a lantern, it simply sees." Since then, May still carries candles, but also learns to sit still when the candles are out, not to read, but to observe her breathing, thoughts, and discomfort. Darkness became a teacher, and the monks noticed her calm, slow, gentle speech. One night, an apprentice sat with him, grumbling, "I don't see anything in the dark." May smiled. That's the beginning. Don't curse the darkness. Don't worship the light. Be the eye that sees both. The owl never flew down or chirped, but its lessons stayed with May for life. Sometimes the clarity is not by adding light, but by learning to sit still when the candle is out. With each breath, we walk through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone contains the greatest truth. Every morning, May opened the curtains and the soft golden light crept through the window, shining on the old photo on the robe. The man in uniform in the photo is her husband, who died 17 years ago. She didn't talk or cry with him, just looked at it. Grief is no longer a storm, but the weather, a part of life without fighting. Her granddaughter asked why she didn't throw away the old photo when she had the new one on her phone. May just smiled. It's not to search, it's to remember. Her husband died in his sleep, without warning, without pain, just quietly. She found him in the morning, his hands still bent as if embracing a dream. She didn't scream, she didn't fall, she just sat next to her, holding her hand and whispering, "Thank you." People told her to be strong, but she didn't try, just kept living. At the nearby temple, The monks talk about impermanence, about how things change, about attachment that creates suffering. May understands this not in theory, but in reality. She loves her husband, but does not hold him. Even in his absence, she let him go, and he never really left her. A Zen teaching says, to hold a butterfly, you have to open your palm. May did not keep the temple in her heart, did not tell the sad story over and over again. She lives in a way that makes her husband proud, takes care of the garden they once planted, drinks his coffee or folds his shirt one last time and takes it away. Not because he no longer loves, but because he doesn't want love to be a cage. A neighbor who lost her husband came to May. Her eyes were red, trembling, and she didn't know how to live without him. May poured tea, sat next to him, was silent at first, and then said softly, "You don't live without him. You live with a part of him still breathing in you." The neighbor cried. May did not stop, just put his hand on her hand, keeping silent. Love does not end but changes shape. Grief is also love, love that knows how to bow its head. Fortunately, now she is old, her hands are soft because of time, and her memories are faint. But every morning she still opens the curtain for the light to come to the photo. Not to bring him back, but to let him go again. Deep in the forest, Siddhartha left behind a regal life, walking among vagrants, beggars, and sages, with a skeleton exposed like a cage, eyes gleaming with discipline or delusion. He sought a teacher and was welcomed for his wisdom and determination. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught meditation on the invisible realms, where consciousness floats like light on the surface of still water. Siddhartha followed his instructions, and with his silent breath and sharp concentration, he reached those quiet plains. His mind was wide open, his thoughts slowed down like clouds drifting through a lake. For many hours, many days, he immersed himself in deep meditation, without fear, without need. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Suffering remained. The world is still the same. Famine still comes to the poor. Old age still bends the back of the farmer. Death still comes to children and kings. He bowed to Arada Kalama, was grateful, and walked on. He next studied with Udaka Ramaputta, teaching about awareness and non-awareness, the immensity of nothingness that transcends all forms. Siddhartha rose high again, learning to let go of the thought of herself, drifting beyond the skin of the world. But when you open your eyes, the truth remains. Desire remains. Aging and death awaits. He thanked the teachers, bowed his head, and walked on. He had reached the highest peak of consciousness, sitting in the palace of the mind, but freedom had not yet come. In the forest next to the Niranjana River, he found a group of 5 ascetics who believed that conquering the body with pain would burn illusions. Siddhartha participated, eating a grain of rice a day, chewing slowly, sleeping outdoors through storms, curling up against the roots of trees, cloaks as thin as air. He held his breath until his eyes were blurred. His head trembled from the wind, his limbs withered, and his skin clung to bones like silk on a rock. His hair fell out in clumps, and the birds perched near him thought he was a branch. He listened to the silence, welcomed the pain, thought it would purify him. But the flame of truth did not flare up. He can silence the body, silence the mind, but the pain remains. Pain asked, "Why am I suffering?" Why do we cling? What puts an end to the endless change of sadness? One day, while bathing in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water only reached the knees, but the strength was exhausted. The world is tilted. The vision is dim. A young girl named Sugata saw it, was touched, and offered him a bowl of rice milk. Trembling hands knelt before him, not knowing whether he was a soul or a dying person. Warm, soft milk flowed through his lips. His body moved, not because of pleasure, but because of memories. The body is not an enemy, nor is the world. In that moment, clarity appears. This is not failure, but understanding. Neither extravagance nor the torment of the flesh freed him. He lived two extremes, went to two coasts, both bound him. Now he will take the middle path, not soft, not rigid, not immersed in pleasure, not drowning in pain, but steady, balanced, alert. He got up and went back to the forest. The five ascetics saw the softness in his footsteps, the color on his cheeks, and they contemptuously said, "He has abandoned the path." Siddhartha didn't argue, didn't explain, just bowed his head and walked on. At the edge of the forest, there is a large fig tree, deep roots and high branches. He knew that was where he was going to sit. He picked up hay as a seat, leaned his back against the tree, crossed his legs, put his hands in his lap, and breathed evenly. He vows, even if his skin withers and his bones turn to dust, he will not get up until he sees the suffering end. The sun sets, the moon rises, the birds are silent, the wind is calm, and in silence the battle begins. Not with a shield sword, but with doubt, memory, fear, and delusion. Here's the next story. Now he sat still, who had walked all the way, ready to look inside. A new chapter begins. In the old station, the old stones, the iron chairs, the pigeons like monks in bright robes, the light signs flashing, the loudspeakers screeching, the trains coming and going, the breath like a tired animal. Every day before noon, an old man wearing a flat hat, wearing an old sweater, never got on the train, said nothing, just sat. Everyone thought he was waiting for someone. His son, his daughter, his wife might not come. They looked at him sympathetically or glanced at him. As the days passed, he still sat there, lonely, silent. One day, a young girl sat next to her, holding the phone, typing repeatedly, half listening to music, restless, breathing rapidly. The old man looked at the tracks, not moving. She asked, "Who are you waiting for?" He smiled. "The absence." She was surprised. "Then why are you here?" He just nodded towards the waiting bench. This is a story of presence, sitting in silence without expecting results, not in a hurry, without commenting. The world is in a hurry. We often rush to meetings, measuring value by achievement. But in Buddhism, there is no coming, only presence. The old man did not hide from life, stepping minute by minute like a bell ringing once, not to signal anything, but because it could. At first, the girl sneered, "Nonsense." The old man nodded, "Yes, and it's peaceful." She paused, looking at him fully for the first time. Something settled on his face. No separation, no chasing. He didn't ask what she did, didn't comment on the news, didn't give advice. He just sat and breathed. When the train came, she didn't leave, turned off the music, turned off the phone, and sat next to him. They shared half an hour of silence, the first time she had a silence in weeks. The Buddha once said, "One word brings more peace than 1,000 empty words." The old man did not speak, but peace spread around him like a scent. He came every day, rain or shine, umbrella in hand, teapot, gentle eyes, not in a hurry. He did not come to do anything, but to stop doing it. We often misunderstand waiting, thinking that it is a pause in front of real life. But sometimes waiting is life, not for anything, but for it. Finally, the girl also came more often, brought tea, sat in the same chair, and was silent. One day she asked, "What if the person you were waiting for doesn't come?" The old man smiled. "I will still be here." That's the power of presence. It doesn't rely on results. It doesn't beg for satisfaction. It's as simple as that. Over time, Others also feel the change. A mother sits quietly for 5 minutes with her child. A commuter takes off her headphones. A woman closes a book of poems, watching the clouds drift. No one says anything, but something is changing. Not noisy, not sudden, like the dew soon melting without anyone noticing. Then one spring day, the old man did not come again. The seats were empty, but silence remained. The tranquility and space he created is still there. By doing nothing, not expecting, needing nothing, not being empty, but full of something precious, peace. The girl still came, not often, without ceremony, only when the world was rushing too fast. She sat down, breathed and smiled as the train passed. Once, a man sitting next to him asked, "Who are you waiting for?" She replied, "No one. I'm just here." The path of Zen opens up like morning dew, soft. This is the parable of the burning house, one of the most famous and profound teachings in the Flower Sutra of Mahayana Buddhism. This story is not simply about deception or blatant lies, but it is about a concept of skillful means, in Buddhism called upaya. It is wisdom, the intelligence to use words and means appropriately, not by imposing rigid truths, but by compassion, deep sympathy, shaped precisely according to the state of mind of the listener. In the story, the father represents the Buddha, and the burning house is a cycle of reincarnation, a world of illusion, suffering, and impermanence. The children who play in that house are us, beings who are not fully aware, engrossed in games, distractions, and false beliefs that everything is okay. The carts that the Father promises are the paths, the methods of practice that we are called to escape from the fire of samsara. Sometimes we need promises. Sometimes we need symbols to comfort and help us believe in a possibility of salvation, to be able to step out of that illusion. This story teaches that the Buddha saw the need to use all possible means, though not absolutely true in a narrow sense, to save sentient beings. The Buddha did not lie to deceive, but he used ingenuity, submissiveness, and compassion to lead us forward, step by step, through the haze of ignorance. The truth does not have to be revealed completely at the same time, but it is the communication according to each situation and each mind of the listener. There is a famous saying in Mahayana that the Dharma is like a raft that helps us cross rivers. But once they got to the other side, no one carried the raft on their backs. The Buddha, too, did not cling to his teachings, but saw them as tools to be used and then let go when they were no longer effective. In the parable, the children are not punished for believing in the goat carts or ox carts that their father promised, because the Buddha's ultimate purpose was not to force people to obey the absolute truth, but to bring them out of danger. If you have to use a car with glittering golden bells and a road full of flowers to get someone to safety, it's the right thing to do. Wisdom without compassion is incomplete, and that is why we, the practitioners, sometimes use such ingenious means. We come to the Dharma for many reasons, often small ones: to breathe easier, to sleep better, to reduce stress. But as we progress gradually, more profound changes begin to occur. The real ox cart came, which meant that profound teachings and true instructions began to unfold, helping us to see clearly what the burning house really was. We begin to awaken, not only from the fire, but also from the very idea that we once belonged to it. The story also teaches us about time, patience, and understanding that not all truths need to be told at once. Helping others wake up isn't about panicking, the house is on fire, but about understanding what they're hearing, what they're afraid of, what they love, and then speaking to them in their own language. The Buddha did not use the power of thunder or impose obedience, but he walked with people, listened and adapted, and then gave them the chariot they were ready to use. Some people criticize this parable, saying that it is a lie or not. But what matters is the end result. The children were safe. The car may not quite live up to its promise, but it takes you to a bigger, more open place, full of freedom. In fact, just as a mother gently tells her child that there are stars hidden behind the clouds, not to deceive, but to comfort, or a doctor mixes medicine with honey to make it easier to drink, the Dharma also meets us where we stand and gradually leads us to places we never knew we could go. The burning house is this world, not because the world is evil, but because it cannot last forever. Everything in the world, joy, power, possessions, even identity, will collapse. The Buddha does not ashame us of being entangled in this world. He only invites us to get out of it somehow, in a way that suits us. Maybe you're on the road to the goat cart, or waiting at the door, or you're still deep inside, holding on to something you love. It's okay. You're seen, understood. And when you're ready, there's a voice, a cart, a path through the haze, calm, steady, clear. A young woman comes in search of answers, not in ritual or scripture, but in a deep understanding of herself. Who am I? She recited the sutras, memorized verses, bowed her head every morning, but there was still a knot in her heart. An old teacher sensed the restlessness and came to sit beside her in silence, looking at the calm water. He pointed to a small drop of water on a leaf above the river and asked, "Is this a drop of water?" She nodded. He smiled and said, "That drop of water, here and not here." A light breeze blew through, causing water droplets to fall and blend into the river. "Now, where is the drop of water?" the teacher asked. This is the story of selflessness, of how the ego that we cling to is like that drop of water, never separated, never alone. We walk through life asking, who am I? What am I? Where will I go when I die? But those questions are like trying to bottle a river. The tighter we hold on, the more water slips through our hands. The Buddha taught that the ego is not fixed. There is no eternal soul. There is only the process of birth and death. There is a continuous flow of body, sensations, perceptions, mental states, and consciousness. Those five aggregates are like waves crashing, always changing. There is nothing that stands still like a boat, only a flow. The meditator sat for days with that thought, looking at his reflection on the water, seeing it transform with the wind, dissipate when there are waves, and then return when the surface of the lake is calm. Is that reflection real? Yes, but is it solid? Not. We exist, but not as an immutable object, but as a flow, like a fire that never stops burning, as an ever-changing piece of music rather than an immovable statue. One night, the practitioner had a dream of standing in front of a vast river, trying to hold the water tightly in his hands, but it began to spill out and flow between his hands to the source. In the dream, she let go, crying not because of sadness, but because of the relief of realizing that she was not an individual drop of water, but a whole river in each of those drops. When she woke up, she wrote in her diary a line, "I am not a drop in a river. I am a river in a drop of water." This is also the heart of rebirth in the Dharma, not the soul moving from one body to another, but the conditions that unfold like water in many different shapes. Clouds, rain, streams, fog, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are the moment that arises from a multitude of causes and will dissolve into new ones. As the old teacher was about to bid farewell to the world, the student, who had now become a teacher, sat beside him and asked, "Are you afraid?" He smiled and said, "A drop of water returns to the river. How can you be afraid?" Then he closed his eyes and took his last breath. But the river continued to flow. So, when you feel small, lost, lonely, remember the drop of water and the river. Although we may feel separate, we have never really been separated. The story shifts to a monastery on a mountainside, where there is a monk who is famous for his rage. He was not a novice, nor was he a person who lacked frustration or ruthlessness, but the flames of rage came very quickly, like a cold wind piercing a dry leaf or a flash of lightning on the still water. The monk's name was Anjan. Years ago, he had left a life of wealth and noise, the son of a noble merchant, foregoing gold and silver, servants and praise in search of greater truth. He shaved his head, put on a simple monk's robe, and then entered the path of cultivation with a firm will, hoping to find the deep tranquility of his soul. But that silence didn't come easily to Anjan. While the other monks meditated like motionless stones, his mind was racing endlessly. When everyone bowed gently in the morning light, his heart was filled with anger because of small words, clumsy actions, or even just because of the slow movements next to him. The Anjan mind is a burning, fierce, and hot fire that refuses to be silent in the serene rhythm of the meditation place. He gritted his teeth, gripped the mala seed in his hand so tightly that it hurt, resented those who asked too many unnecessary questions, but soon regretted his anger. One morning, when a young monk accidentally spilled tea on his robe, Anjan couldn't hold back anymore. He stood up, his voice echoing like thunder in the great hall of the monastery, and shouted, "Do you call this mindfulness?" The young student lowered his head tremblingly, feeling embarrassed, but the incident had already happened, and it was irreversible. The silence that lasted for a long time was then heavy and sharp as a knife blade. That night, the abbot summoned Anjan. He didn't scold, nor did he explain at length, just handed Anjan a small empty bowl, told him to hold it, and went to the ancient pine tree on the edge of the cliff. "Sit there until the bowl is full," he said softly. Anjan blinked at the empty bowl, not knowing how to fill it with that invisible thing. The abbot nodded as if no further explanation was needed. "Fill it with silence." Anjan walked quietly under the shadow of the pine tree, the tree standing crooked in the vast sky, the sharp needles as if whispering in the wind, the trunk calloused by time and weathering. He sat down, the bowl on his lap, his heart full of questions. How can you fill a bowl with stillness? Hours passed, the birds singing, the clouds drifting gently in the blue sky, his legs aching from sitting for a long time. But the bowl was still empty. His mind was still full of chaotic thoughts. "Stupid," he said to himself. "I should have studied more. I'm sure they're laughing at me at the convent." The fire of anger burned again, giving rise to a familiar heat that made him stand up, ready to leave. But then he stopped, looking for the first time directly at the bowl, at the pine trees, and the quiet sky beyond the cliff. A gentle feeling spread through his heart, not liberation, but a new realization that his mind was noisy, and the world was not. Anjan sat down, not to succeed, not to prove anything, but simply to become. Day after day, he returned to the pine tree, bringing with him anger, moments of peace, tears, and empty bowls. He began to pay attention to his breathing, not trying to control it, but just observing each breath that came and went. He realized that thoughts were not commands, but like the weather. They came and went, constantly changing. They were like clouds that drifted through the sky of his soul. One day, a beetle crawled through the rim of the bowl. Anjun didn't rush to smash it away, but observed its small effort and then whispered, "Thank you." A few weeks later, he returned before the abbot. The bowl was still empty, but his eyes were brighter and clearer. "Did you bring what I requested?" the abbot asked. Anjun bowed his head. "I did not fill the bowl with stillness, but emptied it from everything else." It is the story of the angry monk, and how the fire that meets the vast space becomes warm tenderness. Anger is not a bad thing. It is energy. It is fire. Fire can cook food or burn down a temple. The Dharma does not teach the suppression of emotions, but teaches them to transform them. Anjun doesn't erase his anger, but sits with it, seeing through its deep roots, fear, pride, and expectations. When this is clearly seen, the anger naturally subsides. You can't calm the mind by force. You can't force a bowl full of stillness by force. You can just stop stirring the water and wait for it to become clear again. We all carry our own bowl and try to fill it with achievement, reaction, correctness, and control. But wise people know that the real work is to emptiness, not to lose, but to make space for peace. A Zen saying says, "Let go or be pulled." You don't have to destroy your fire. Just give it space, allow it to breathe, let it teach you the true meaning of stillness. And remember, silence is not without movement, but without resistance. Like a tree swaying in the wind without breaking. Like a bowl reflecting the sky just because it doesn't try to do it. Let your bowl be empty, and in that emptiness, find peace. Story continues. In the garden behind the ancient temple, there is a rustic stone Buddha statue with no golden crown, no elaborate altar, just a rock that has weathered over time by rain, wind, and decades of silence. Moss covered the statue's base, vines wrapped around the stone arms, and birds perched on the top of the statue without paying homage. But he still sat there, his eyes closed, his hands folded, motionless. Generations of monks passed by, who swept the aisles, who meditated nearby, but few people really cared about the statue. Time had blurred his face. No one prayed, no one noticed. Visitors often ignore the statue, paying attention to the shiny lacquer statues inside the main hall, and he is only a faint part of the scenery. One day, a village girl came to deliver vegetables, and while her father was talking to the cook, she lost her way through the herb garden and then walked to the bell tower, where she saw the Buddha statue. Maybe it's silence, maybe it's stillness, or it's simply the thick dust on the statue that makes it seem mysterious. She reached out and touched the statue's cheek, feeling the cold, rough, and strangely real feeling. "Who is this?" she asked when her father returned. The chef chuckled. "It's just an old Buddha." "No one matters," he said. But the abbot, who was standing nearby, turned around and smiled. "No one matters, but maybe he's teaching us more than we realize." The next day, she returned with a cloth that gently wiped the statue's face. The dirt could not be removed completely. Some parts were too deep and stubborn. But she persevered until the second and third days, carrying water, polishing one ear of the statue, wiping clean the folds of the robe, not to brighten the statue, but to discover what was hidden under that thick layer of dust. Every day, the statue seems to return to a little life, not only in sight, but also in spiritual presence. The villagers began to pay attention. Some offered flowers. One brought a small bowl of rice. The monks looked at each other a little confused. "This statue has always been here," one person said. "Why are people paying attention now?" The abbot just smiled and pointed to the little girl, because someone remembers him. That evening, during the sermon, the abbot told an old story. That in a Thai temple, there was once a very simple clay Buddha statue. During one of the remodels, the statue appeared cracked, and when the monks searched, they discovered that underneath the clay was pure gold. He paused for a moment and then said, "The dust has hidden the thing that always shines." The monks were silent, understanding that the implication was not only about the statue, but also about the human soul itself. We often forget that beneath the dust of habit, failure, fame, and time, there is always preciousness and purity. She didn't fully understand the deep meaning of the doctrine, but she did enough to know that things that are neglected can be sacred, and that what others pass by may be worth sitting back and contemplating. Months have passed. The stone Buddha is still covered with dust, but now the dust is gently wiped. Not wiped away, but respected as part of being. Cracks are not patched, mold is not shaved off, because the lesson is not perfection, but acceptance and appreciation of the traces of time. Years later, the girl grew up, leaving the village for the city to study, but every time she returned, she came to the statue, bowed her head, closed her eyes, and sat quietly. One spring, she returned and found a small plaque placed next to the stone Buddha, with the inscription, "Covered in dust, still intact." Below is a haiku, "Stones do not forget, even when covered with moss." The silence is still there. The statue never moved, never spoke a word, never shone, but changed those who were patient enough to look long, to remember, and to feel. That change does not come from demanding attention, but from waiting patiently, from allowing someone to remember that underneath the thick dust, nothing is missing. The wind in Lumbini blows gently like a breath between two worlds. Spring came, the trees bloomed white flowers, the branches swayed and bent under the weight of 1,000 flowers, floating gently like snow in the sun. And then, a major event was about to take place. The Mayan queen of Kapilavastu had been away from her home country for a long time. The moment of giving birth was approaching, and according to custom, she chose to return to the village where her family had given birth. This would be the beginning of a great story, a new chapter in the history of Buddhism and humanity. The journey is long, but gentle. The waiters walked quietly beside her. No one said anything, just walking with regular and careful footsteps. The sky is still clear, deep blue spreading overhead, and the earth beneath your feet seems softer, taking every step as a gentle and peaceful welcome. When they arrived at Lumbini, which had been chosen for this momentous event, Maya smiled, a calm smile full of hope and faith. The atmosphere here was different, cooler, softer, as if the whole forest knew it was about to witness a miracle. The light penetrates the foliage, forming soft, sparkling beams of light like delicate silk threads swaying in the wind. Maya stepped off the carriage, took off her sandals, and stepped barefoot into the forest, feeling the ground moist and cool under her feet. The birds didn't fly away when she arrived. They just stopped, listened, and observed. In the center of the forest, there is a tall, ancient tree with a wide and brilliant canopy, blooming flowers, emitting a sweet fragrance. Maya gently reached for a low branch, placed on it her delicate hand. There was no squeak, no trembling, just a deep breath and a completely peaceful presence. In that silence, in the shade of an ancient tree, a child was born. But this is not an ordinary child, without the cry of being born. His eyes were wide open. His eyes were as dark and deep as the night sky before the rain, and his skin seemed to glow with a light that did not belong to this world. A gentle breeze begins to stir the surrounding leaves as if humming an ancient nature song. The attendants rushed closer to help. The midwife quickly gagged to keep the sacred silence of the moment. The sky seemed to turn pale yellow, a color of peace and promise. Legend has it that the flowers on the ancient tree bow down as if to witness that sacred moment. The child didn't need anyone to hold him. He got up on his own feet and walked 7 steps slowly. Every step that touched the ground, a lotus flower bloomed. Not a metaphor, but a truth. The petals of the lotus flower opened brilliantly under his small heels. The sweet fragrance spread throughout the space, and the world seemed to stop in amazement and admiration. The animals stopped eating grass. The springs stopped flowing, and even the wind turned to see that divine moment. When the 7th step was over, the boy raised one hand to heaven, the other to the ground, and in an uneducated but deep and powerful voice, His Holiness declared, "In this life, I was born for the benefit of all sentient beings. This is my last birth. I will stop suffering." It is said that the Devas, the gods of the distant realms, gathered in silence, folded their hands and bowed their heads to this rare wonder. A bodhisattva who has been fully enlightened in previous lives has now returned to walk on earth again. The flowers in the sky fell like rain in the air. The trumpets sounded, even though no musical instruments sounded. The celestial bodies whispered blessings that humans could not hear. Even mortals, who have no name for these miracles, feel the change. A man wept for some reason. A horse knelt in its reins, a pot of rice boiling, even though there was no fire burning. Something has entered the world, something that is both ancient and completely new. The child was named Siddhartha, which means the one who achieved his goal. In that small face, those who observe closely see the blend of softness and strength, like a calm ocean deep inside the movement of a child. He didn't laugh more or cry less than the other children, but when they looked into his eyes, it felt as if he had seen through many lives they had forgotten. Queen Maya hugged the child tightly, feeling his heartbeat blend with hers, but deep down, she knew that this child belonged not only to her, but to the whole world. The news of Siddhartha's birth quickly spread. When the child was only a few days old, the king summoned the wisest sages in the region. Among them is a Siddha, an old hermit who lives in the mountains, dressed in an ash-colored robe, whose eyes have witnessed the transformation of the seasons. He entered the palace slowly, not carrying a staff, nor asking for favors. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, a Siddha's lips trembled, tears flowing not out of sadness but out of realization. He bowed deeply to the child, then stood up and turned to the king, saying that this child would not rule a kingdom, but would rule the hearts of men. He will not use soldiers, but will end suffering with wisdom and compassion. The child is destined to become a Buddha, an enlightened person who will show the way through sorrows. But Atsita admits he won't live long enough to see his teachings. This is his only sadness. The room was so silent that even the oil lamp seemed to lean toward the child to listen. The king said nothing, and the queen hugged her son even tighter. But life didn't last long for Maya. Some say that it is her karma to return to the heavenly realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a whole world, and that there are bodies that are created only to hold that grace for a short time. Others believe that she became the child's guardian spirit, watching him from outside the veil of the physical world. Her presence could be felt in the gentle breeze that soothed his fevers, in the birds singing outside the window. Seda was raised by her older sister, growing up in the warmth and peace of love. The memories of the forest, of the trees, of the dream under the moonlight were still alive in him. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he rarely spoke of his birth. Instead, he taught about suffering, about the path to liberation, about the breath and the impermanence of life. But once, when asked about what it means to walk on lotus flowers, His Holiness smiled and said, "The path is already under my feet. I don't make it appear. I simply walk to where it has always been. Truth is not invented, but remembered. Like the lotus petals at your feet, waiting for attention to bloom." And so the child walking on the lotus became a guide, teaching others how to walk in peace, step after step, until suffering also began to blossom into wisdom. He did not say many words, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even to the abbot himself who invited him to drink tea. He simply bowed, walked, and bowed again. He is called the silent pilgrim. He carried nothing but a small cloth bag and wooden sandals that had worn out after years of wandering the road. His face, painted by the wind and sun, revealed a calm and respectful expression. His back was slightly bent, not because of age, but out of reverence. Every third step he stopped, put his palms together, and lowered his head to the ground. Step, step, bow, step, step, bow. He walked hundreds of miles like that, through rice fields, through dusty plains, through mountain passes and cities, through cold rain, harsh sun, and snowfall. He never asked, never pleaded, never preached, just bowed his head. When he arrived at the gate of a remote temple on a hill, a monk rushed in and announced, "The pilgrims have arrived." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with their arms crossed, others whispered and talked. Someone sneered, "What is this, a performance?" Another was skeptical. Surely he seeks merit or praise. But the abbot just smiled, telling everyone to wait and watch. The pilgrim walks out onto the stone path in front of the temple gate, walks away, bows his head. Palms lightly touch the pebbles, forehead touches the ground in deep reverence. He stood up slowly and continued walking. The whole morning passed, and he kept bowing his head on that path. By noon, he had arrived at the temple yard. The air there was unusually quiet. Only the sound of gravel rolling and the sound of soft breathing mingled with the sound of branches swaying in the wind. Step, step, bow. In the evening, when he reached the foot of the temple steps, he did not climb the steps. Instead, he bowed his head again, then turned his back and began his journey down the mountain, walking, walking, bowing, bowing. The monks watched with confusion and admiration. He never entered, never asked to stay. He only came to bow his head. The abbot nodded, realizing that in that bow he had gone deeper than any of them. This is a story of devotion to practice without words, but living deep in every step. In the West, it is often thought that wisdom must be imparted through words, eloquent sermons, sharp arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings come from silence. The silent pilgrim does not explain his way. He became that way. With each bow, he dedicates himself to the present moment, to humility, gratitude, and wholehearted presence. He bowed his head not to worship the earth, but to remember that he belonged to it. In Buddhism, bowing is not an act of submission, but an act of letting go of the ego, surrendering oneself in honor of existence. The sky cannot rise without the sun, trees cannot grow without soil, and man cannot breathe without receiving the generosity of all things around him. To bow is to remember that the pilgrim does not need an outside teacher. Every grain of dust, every callus on the foot is a lesson. Every bow is a verse in the canon of the road. He asks nothing, does not judge anyone, does not try to modify doctrine. He only gave his body, his time, his breath. It was his deepest dedication, his greatest sermon. A young monk, touched by this devotion, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that, bow my head like that?" The abbot replied, "No, unless your heart has bowed your head too. It is not copying form, but sincerity from within. Some people bow their heads with their bodies, but the mind still judges. Others bow their heads with action, but stand upright in their hearts. True beings begin within. It is the quiet collapse of pride, the surrender of the need to be seen, the softness of the present. There is a saying in Zen that the great path is not difficult for the unhospitable. The silent pilgrim needs no praise or attention, no need to arrive or go on time. His goal was not to go to the temple, but to the bow of the way itself. Step, step, bow, step again, bow again, over and over again, until there is no one left to recognize the action, only pure gesture, pure giving, and pure path. Whoever you are, you can bow your head, not only with your body, but also by the way you listen, wait, serve, and be present in the face of the simplest things, like dust on the floor or silence in your friend's eyes. Bowing is gentle, slow, remembering important things, and sometimes saying it all without a word. When the light of awareness brightens up a little, we come to the next story, a story that leads us with silence so that we can listen and feel more deeply each moment of our lives. Let that stillness guide you right now as you open your heart to this story, the story of existence and love in every step of life.